7-year-old Violet Shaw had 3 days to do the impossible with wire, pennies, and a nail file. The elderly veteran's jammed M1911 pistol sat in pieces on her kitchen table, each broken component a puzzle her late father had taught her to solve with whatever she could find. While her mother Laura worked, Violet machined makeshift parts from household scraps, racing against the veteran's birthday and their own eviction deadline. Lieutenant General Edward Bancroft thought he'd never see his treasured sidearm again. He didn't know the tiny girl he'd met in the park was improvising what professional gunsmiths couldn't fix. He didn't know her father had taken a bullet meant for him. Quick pause before we continue. Tell us, where in the world are you watching from? If you're enjoying these stories, make sure to hit subscribe, because tomorrow's episode is absolutely mind-blowing. The October afternoon hung heavy over Riverside Veterans Memorial Park, the kind of day where the sun couldn't quite commit to warmth. Violet sat on the edge of a wooden bench, her legs too short to reach the ground, swinging back and forth in a rhythm only she understood. Her sneakers were scuffed white canvas, held together with duct tape along the left sole. She wore a purple jacket 2 sizes too big, sleeves rolled up 3 times to free her small hands. In her lap sat a library book about the history of firearms, the pages worn soft from repeated reading. The librarian, Lisa Morrison, had looked uncertain when Violet first requested books on weaponry, but the child's earnest explanation about her father had softened the woman's concern. Now Lisa saved military history books for Violet, understanding that they were the thread connecting the girl to a parent she barely remembered. Violet's blonde hair was pulled into 2 uneven pigtails, one higher than the other because she'd done them herself that morning. Her mother had already left for work at the Montgomery estate by the time Violet woke up. At 7 years old, Violet knew how to make cereal, lock the apartment door, and walk the 4 blocks to the park where she waited for the school bus each morning. The park itself was modest, a half-acre square of struggling grass surrounded by cracked sidewalks. At its center stood a granite memorial, a simple obelisk engraved with names of local service members who never came home. Chief Warrant Officer Richard Shaw's name was etched near the bottom, added 3 years ago after an improvised explosive device in Kandahar turned a routine convoy into a tragedy. Violet visited the memorial every day, running her fingers over the carved letters of her father's name, tracing the R and the S until she could feel them in her sleep. She was 4 when he died, old enough to remember his voice, the way he smelled like gun oil and coffee, the patience in his hands as he showed her how things worked. Other children didn't understand why Violet preferred the park to playgrounds. They didn't understand why she read books about rifles instead of fairy tales. Derek Matthews, a boy 3 years older who rode the same bus, called her Weird Shaw and made gun noises whenever she walked past. His friend, Trevor Hughes, had knocked the firearms book from her hands last week, pages scattering across the cafeteria floor. But Violet didn't mind being alone. Alone meant quiet. Quiet meant she could think about her father's lessons. The way he'd disassembled a pistol on their kitchen table, naming each component like introducing old friends. Slide, barrel, recoil spring, firing pin, extractor. Her father believed children should understand how things worked, that knowledge was the greatest inheritance he could provide. Respect the weapon, but don't fear it, he'd told her, his calloused hands guiding her smaller ones. Fear comes from ignorance. Understanding brings mastery. Violet looked up from her book when she heard the shuffle of footsteps on the path. An elderly man approached the memorial, moving slowly, one hand pressed against his lower back. He wore khaki pants and a blue windbreaker over a white-collared shirt. A veteran's cap sat on his head, adorned with pins and insignia Violet recognized from her books. His face was weathered, deeply lined with pale blue eyes that held the distant look of someone accustomed to seeing horizons. The man stopped at the memorial, reading the names with the careful attention of someone conducting a sacred ritual. His lips moved silently. After a long moment, he reached out and touched several names, his fingers lingering on each one. Violet watched him, recognizing the gesture. She'd seen other veterans do the same thing, visiting the memorial like a church, speaking to the dead in whispers. The man turned, perhaps sensing her observation, and their eyes met. He nodded, a small acknowledgement. Violet nodded back. "You come here often?" he asked, his voice gravelly but kind. "Every day," Violet said. "My dad's name is on there." The man's expression shifted, hardness melting into something gentler. "Is that so? Which one?" "Chief Warrant Officer Richard Shaw," Violet said, pointing. "He died 3 years ago in Afghanistan. He was an armorer." The man walked closer to where she pointed, studying the name. "An armorer," he repeated. "Important work. The best armorers I knew could diagnose a weapon malfunction just by the sound it made." "My dad could do that," Violet said, brightening. "He said every gun has a voice, and if you listen, it tells you what's wrong." "Your father was a wise man," the man said. He moved toward the bench, gesturing to the empty space beside Violet. "Mind if I sit? My back's not what it used to be." "Okay," Violet said, scooting over to make room. The man lowered himself onto the bench with a grunt, settling with the careful deliberation of someone managing chronic pain. Up close, Violet could see the details she'd missed from a distance. A scar along his jawline, faded but visible. Hands marked with age spots and old calluses. A wedding ring worn smooth. "I'm Eddie," he said, extending his hand. "Violet," she replied, shaking it. His grip was firm despite his age. "That's a beautiful name," Eddie said. "Like the flower." "My mom says my dad picked it because violets are small but tough. They grow in places other flowers can't." "Smart man," Eddie said. He glanced at the book in her lap. "Interesting reading for someone your age." Violet held up the book so he could see the cover. "It's about the M1 Garand. My dad said it was the rifle that won World War II. He said General Patton called it the greatest battle implement ever devised." Eddie's eyebrows rose. "You know your history." "I like learning about guns," Violet said simply. "People think it's weird, but my dad taught me that weapons are just tools. It's the person using them that matters." "Your father taught you well," Eddie said. There was something in his voice, a weight of agreement born from experience. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching leaves spiral down from the oak trees surrounding the park. The afternoon light slanted golden through the branches, casting long shadows across the memorial. Eddie shifted, reaching into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a handkerchief-wrapped bundle and carefully unfolded the cloth. Nestled inside was a pistol, its steel surface dull with age and wear. Violet recognized it immediately. "M1911, she breathed, leaning forward. "Colt, .45 semi-automatic?" Eddie looked at her with surprise. "You know your pistols too." "My dad had manuals for everything," Violet said. "He said the 1911 was the best combat pistol ever made. 100 years old and still reliable." "Usually reliable," Eddie said, his tone rueful. He held the weapon carefully, pointed safely away. "This one's giving me trouble. The slide's jammed. Won't budge. I've tried oil, I've tried force, nothing." "Can I see?" Violet asked, her hands already reaching. Eddie hesitated, the instinct to refuse almost automatic. A child asking to handle a firearm went against every safety protocol. But something in Violet's eyes, the confidence and respect there, made him pause. "It's not loaded," he said. "I checked 3 times. But, still." "Treat every weapon as if it's loaded," Violet recited. "Check the chamber. Remove the magazine, verify clear. My dad made me say it every time." Eddie studied her for a long moment, then slowly handed over the pistol. "Your father raised you right." Violet took the weapon with both hands, immediately angling it toward the ground, finger off the trigger area. She turned it over, examining the frame. The pistol was clearly old, the bluing worn away in spots, revealing the steel beneath. Engravings on the slide indicated it was a military-issue model from World War II. "Have you tried field stripping it?" Violet asked. "Can't," Eddie said. "That's the problem. The slide won't retract far enough to release. Something's seized inside." Violet held the pistol up to her ear and gently manipulated what parts would move, listening. "There's something catching," she murmured. "It sounds like the recoil spring guide might be bent, or there's debris binding the slide rails." Eddie stared at her. "How old are you?" 7, Violet said, still examining the weapon. "I'll be 8 in January." 7, Eddie repeated, disbelief coloring his voice. "And you know about recoil spring guides?" "My dad started teaching me when I was 4, Violet explained. "He said understanding mechanics early builds neural pathways. I don't know what that means exactly, but he showed me how everything fits together." We took apart his service pistol probably 100 times. She ran her small finger along the slide, feeling for anomalies. This needs to be opened up, cleaned, and probably have parts replaced. The extractor feels loose too. I took it to 3 gunsmiths, Eddie said. 2 said it was too far gone, not worth repairing. The third wanted $400 and 6 weeks. Violet looked up at him, her pale blue eyes serious. I could fix it. Eddie's first instinct was to laugh, but the sound died in his throat when he saw her expression. She wasn't joking. She wasn't playing pretend. She believed she could repair a weapon that had defeated professional gunsmiths. "Violet," he said gently, "I appreciate the offer, but this is complicated work. Even if you know the theory." "I know more than theory," Violet interrupted, then caught herself. "Sorry, I didn't mean to be rude, but my dad didn't just show me pictures, he let me do the work. He guided my hands until I could do it myself. He said I had a gift for it." "Your mother lets you work on firearms?" Eddie asked, concern creeping into his voice. Violet's enthusiasm dimmed. "My mom doesn't know. She works a lot. She's a maid at the Montgomery estate, and she does cleaning jobs at night sometimes too. She's really tired all the time." "I see," Eddie said carefully. The picture was coming into focus now. A single mother working multiple jobs, a child left to her own devices, finding connection to her lost father through his teachings. "I'm not supposed to touch guns without an adult," Violet added quickly, "but I just look at pictures in books now. I don't have any real ones to practice with since Dad died." Eddie looked at the jammed pistol in his hands, then at the small, earnest girl beside him. Every instinct screamed that this was inappropriate, that children and weapons didn't mix, that he should thank her politely and leave. But something else whispered beneath those instincts, the memory of gifted soldiers he'd known who seemed born understanding machinery, who could diagnose problems others missed. "This pistol," Eddie said slowly, "is very important to me. It was issued to me in 1968 when I shipped out to Vietnam. It was with me through 3 tours. It's been with me for 57 years. "Is your birthday coming up?" Violet asked suddenly. Eddie blinked at the change in subject. "Yes, actually, Thursday. I'll be 73. 3 days, Violet said, thinking, "If you let me try, I could have it fixed by your birthday, as a present." "Violet, I can't ask a child to." "You're not asking, I'm offering." She looked at the pistol with longing. "I miss working with my hands. I miss feeling close to my dad. This would help me too." Eddie felt his resolve wavering. Where would you even work on it? "Our apartment. I have some of my dad's old tools. Not everything, but enough. And I have books that show the schematics." She looked up at him, hope shining in her eyes. "Please. I promise I'll be careful. I promise I'll treat it with respect." "Your mother works until 6, Violet said. "I get home from school at 3:30. That's 2.5 hours every day. And she works Saturday mornings too." Eddie rubbed his face with both hands. This was insane. Letting a 7-year-old attempt to repair a firearm that professionals had given up on. Yet something in him, the part that had learned to trust instinct over convention during decades of military service, was considering it. "If I agreed to this," he said slowly, "and that's a big if, there would be rules." Violet straightened, paying full attention. "First, the firing pin comes out before you take it home. I'll remove it now. That way, even if you somehow found ammunition, which you won't, the weapon couldn't fire." "Okay," Violet said. "Second, you document everything. Every step, every part you touch. You draw pictures or write it down. If something goes wrong, I need to know exactly what you did." "I can do that." "Third, if at any point you feel uncertain or unsafe, you stop immediately and call me. I'll give you my phone number." "I don't have a phone," Violet admitted. "But there's a payphone near our building, and Mrs. Kimball next door lets me use hers for emergencies." Eddie processed this. A child without a cell phone in 2025 was unusual, another indicator of the family's financial situation. "All right," he said. "Then we agree you stop if anything feels wrong, and you call me before making any decisions you're unsure about." "Yes, sir," Violet said, and Eddie heard the military child in that response, the automatic respect for authority. He looked at his watch. "When does your school bus come?" 4:15, Violet said. "I have 20 minutes." Eddie made his decision. From his wallet, he withdrew a business card, simple white cardstock with just a name and phone number. Walter Harrison had ordered them printed last year, insisting Eddie needed something to give people when networking. Eddie had thought it unnecessary for a retired officer, but now he was grateful. Walter Harrison. Violet read from the card, "That's not your name." "That's my assistant," Eddie explained. "He answers my phone, manages my schedule. If you call that number and tell him you're calling about the pistol project, he'll make sure I get the message immediately, day or night." Violet carefully tucked the card into her jacket pocket, treating it like treasure. Eddie pulled out his pocket multi-tool and extended a small screwdriver. Working with practiced efficiency despite his arthritis, he used the tool to drift out the firing pin after partially disassembling what he could from the rear of the weapon. The pin came free, a small metal rod that he slipped into a plastic pill bottle from his pocket. "There," he said, showing her the empty firing pin channel. "Now it's truly inert. It's just mechanical parts, nothing that can fire." Violet watched the process intently, nodding. "That was smart, using the screwdriver as a drift pin." "Sometimes you have to improvise," Eddie said. He rewrapped the pistol in the handkerchief, hesitating one last time before placing it in Violet's small hands. "This is an extraordinary amount of trust I'm placing in you." "I know," Violet said solemnly. She held the bundle like it contained a live dove. "I won't let you down." "I believe you won't try to," Eddie said. "But Violet, if you can't fix it, that's okay too. This pistol has already lived a long life. Sometimes things break beyond repair, and that's not a failure on anyone's part." "I can fix it," Violet said with quiet confidence. "My dad always said that if humans built it, humans can rebuild it. You just have to understand how the parts talk to each other." Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. A diesel engine's rumble announced the approaching school bus. Violet stood, tucking the wrapped pistol carefully into her oversized jacket, zipping it closed. "Thursday is 3 days away," she said. "I'll meet you here Thursday afternoon, same time. 4 o'clock?" 4 o'clock, Eddie agreed, standing with effort. "Violet, before you go, does your mother know you talk to strangers in the park?" Violet's expression flickered with something like guilt. "She tells me to be careful, but you don't feel like a stranger. You feel like my dad's people." "Your dad's people?" Eddie repeated softly. "What makes you think I'm military?" "Your posture," Violet said immediately. "The way you said, 6 weeks and $400, instead of $400 in 6 weeks, time before money. Your haircut. The way you touched the names on the memorial, like you knew some of them. And your cap has a 3rd Corps patch. My dad served under 3rd Corps for 2 years. Eddie felt a chill run down his spine. This child saw everything. The school bus hissed to a stop at the curb. The door folded open, revealing a driver who looked half asleep, barely glancing at the children boarding. "I have to go," Violet said. "Thank you for trusting me, Eddie." She ran toward the bus with the particular gait of a small child carrying something precious, arms held carefully against her chest. Eddie watched her climb the steps, saw her take a seat near the back, and observed the way other children shifted away from her, leaving her in isolated space. The bus pulled away, brake lights glowing red in the October afternoon. Eddie stood alone in the park, staring at the spot where Violet had been, wondering if he'd just made a terrible mistake or witnessed the beginning of something remarkable. In his pocket, his phone buzzed. He pulled it out to see a text from Walter Harrison. "Dinner with the Bradfords tonight, 7 p.m. Don't forget." Eddie typed back, "Cancel it. Something's come up." He looked at the memorial one more time, his eyes finding the name Richard Shaw. "Your daughter has your gift," he said quietly to the stone. "I hope I haven't done wrong by her." The wind picked up, scattering more leaves across the path. Eddie turned and walked toward his car, a modest sedan parked on the street. His back ached, his knees protested, and his pistol was in the hands of a 7-year-old child. But for the first time in months, he felt something like hope. Violet pressed her face against the school bus window, watching the park recede into the distance. Her heart hammered against the bundle hidden in her jacket. She'd held weapons before, but never one that mattered this much to someone. This wasn't practice. This was responsibility. Derek Matthews sat 3 rows ahead with Trevor Hughes, their voices carrying over the bus's engine noise. "Did you see Weird Shaw talking to that old man?" Derek said loudly. Probably telling him about her dead dad again. That's all she ever talks about. Maybe the old guy's her new imaginary friend, Trevor added, and they both laughed. Violet stared out the window, letting the words slide off. She'd learned that responding only fed their cruelty. Instead, she thought about the pistol, mentally cataloging what she'd observed. The slide was definitely binding, but the question was where and why. Carbon buildup was possible, but Eddie had said he'd tried cleaning it. That meant mechanical failure, something bent or broken inside. The bus lurched through downtown Riverside, past the storefronts that mixed military surplus stores with antique shops and failing restaurants. Fort Morgan loomed in the distance, its gates visible from the highway, a reminder that this town existed because of the base, lived and died by its rhythms. Violet's stop was in the Oak Ridge Towers complex, a grouping of 3 5-story apartment buildings with peeling beige paint and cracked parking lots. The bus groaned to a halt at the corner, and Violet hurried down the aisle, ignoring Derek's mock salute as she passed. The October air bit at her cheeks as she walked the concrete path toward Building B. Mrs. Betty Kimball sat on a folding chair outside her first-floor apartment, bundled in a thick cardigan, smoking a cigarette. "There's my girl," Betty called out, her voice rough from decades of cigarettes. "How was school?" "Fine, Mrs. Kimball," Violet said, pausing. Betty was 67, a widow whose husband had died in the Gulf War. She kept an eye on Violet when she could, always with one eye on her own door, always aware of the thin line between helpful and intrusive. "Your mama left you lunch money?" Betty asked. "I packed a sandwich," Violet said, which wasn't quite a lie. She'd made a sandwich, she just hadn't eaten it, saving it for dinner to stretch their food further. "You're a good kid," Betty said. "Too grown up for 7. You come knock if you need anything, you hear?" "Yes, ma'am." Violet climbed the interior stairs to the 3rd floor. The stairwell smelled of cigarette smoke and mildew, the walls tagged with marker graffiti. She reached apartment 3C and pulled her key from the shoelace around her neck, hidden beneath her shirt. The apartment was silent and cold. The heat had been shut off again. The building's boiler was perpetually broken, and the landlord, Malcolm Jennings, took his time with repairs. Violet had learned to dress in layers. She locked the door behind her, engaged the chain lock, and went straight to the kitchen. The space was tiny, barely room for 2 people to pass each other, but her mother kept it ruthlessly clean. Not a dish in the sink, not a crumb on the counter. Violet set her backpack on one of the 2 mismatched chairs at the small table. She carefully removed the handkerchief-wrapped pistol from her jacket and placed it in the center of the table, unfolding the cloth like a surgeon preparing instruments. The M1911 Saturday under the fluorescent light, its worn steel showing years of use and care. Violet touched it gently, feeling the cool metal, the weight of history. "Okay, Dad," she whispered, "help me figure this out." She went to her mother's bedroom. They shared it, Violet sleeping on a mattress on the floor while Laura took the bed. In the closet, behind her mother's work uniforms, sat a cardboard box labeled Richard's Tools in her mother's careful handwriting. Laura hadn't been able to throw away her husband's belongings. She'd packed them carefully, intending to give them to Violet when she was older, not knowing that Violet secretly opened the box regularly, touching the tools like talismans. Violet pulled out the tool roll, a canvas wrap that unfurled to reveal an array of small implements, punches in various sizes, files, a small brass hammer, jeweler's screwdrivers, a set of Allen keys. Her father's name was written in Sharpie on the canvas, CW4R Shaw. She carried the tools to the kitchen and laid them out beside the pistol. Then she retrieved her notebook from her backpack, opened to a fresh page and wrote at the top, M1911 repair, Eddie's birthday present, Day 1. She drew a quick sketch of the pistol from above, labeling the visible parts. Then she began the careful work of examination. Without the ability to fully disassemble the weapon due to the jammed slide, she was limited in what she could see. But her father had taught her that observation came before force. "Listen," he'd always said. "Feel. Let the weapon tell you its story." Violet held the pistol up to her ear again, gently trying to manipulate the slide. There, a grinding sensation, metal on metal, slightly forward of center. She wrote it down. Binding sensation, 3/4 inch from full rear position. She examined the visible portion of the recoil spring guide through the ejection port. It looked straight, but she couldn't see the full length. Carbon buildup around the barrel hood was visible, but not excessive. Time passed in focused silence. Violet tried various safe manipulations, documenting each one, building a mental map of the problem. Her father had taught her systematic diagnosis, eliminate variables one by one. The sound of footsteps in the hallway made her freeze. She glanced at the cheap plastic clock on the wall, 5:45, too early for her mother. The footsteps stopped at their door, 3 heavy knocks, aggressive and impatient. Violet quickly covered the pistol with the handkerchief and moved toward the door, standing on tiptoe to look through the peephole. Malcolm Jennings stood in the hallway, his heavy frame filling the fisheye lens, his expression sour. He was a large man who seemed to take pleasure in his authority over his tenants, wielding late fees like weapons. Violet didn't open the door. "My mom's not home," she called through the wood. "I know she's not home," Malcolm's voice boomed. "That's why I'm here. You tell her I need to see her tonight. She's behind on rent again." "She paid last week," Violet said, her voice smaller than she wanted. "She paid October," Malcolm said. "We're into November now. November's due, plus the late fee from September she still hasn't covered. That's $600 total by Friday. Or I start eviction paperwork." Violet's stomach dropped. $600. She knew what her mother made. $600 was impossible. "I'll tell her," Violet said. "You do that," Malcolm said. She heard his heavy steps retreating down the hallway. Violet stood frozen by the door, her breath coming fast. Eviction. She knew what that word meant. It meant boxes on the curb. It meant sleeping in the car, if they still had the car. It meant her mother's face crumpling in the way that scared Violet more than anything. She returned to the kitchen table, looking at the pistol. For a moment, the task seemed absurd. A child playing with a weapon while her world collapsed around her. But then she touched the tool roll, felt her father's name under her fingers. "Make do with what you have," she whispered, repeating his mantra. She picked up a pencil and returned to her notebook, forcing herself to focus. The pistol was a problem she could solve. The pistol was 3 days of purposeful work. The pistol was connection to her father when everything else felt broken. Violet wrote, Hypothesis 1, recoil spring bent. Hypothesis 2, slide rail damage. Hypothesis 3, broken part lodged in mechanism. Then she added, need to access internal parts, must find way to disassemble without slide removal. She worked until the light outside the window faded to purple, until her mother's key turned in the lock. Laura Shaw entered the apartment with a slow shuffle of exhaustion. She was a small woman, blonde like her daughter, her face aged beyond her 38 years by worry and physical labor. She wore black pants and a white polo shirt under a thin jacket, her uniform from the Montgomery estate. "Baby girl," Laura said, managing a smile. "You doing homework?" "Almost done," Violet said, quickly closing her notebook over her sketches. She'd moved the pistol back into its handkerchief wrap, tucked partially under a dish towel. Laura set down her purse and immediately went to the sink, running water to wash her hands. "How was school?" "Fine," Violet said. "Mrs. Reed said my geography project was really good." "That's my smart girl," Laura said. She dried her hands and opened the refrigerator, staring at its sparse contents. A carton of eggs, half a loaf of bread, a container of leftover rice from 2 days ago, some margarine, wilting lettuce. Violet watched her mother's shoulders tense, saw the calculation happening. What could be stretched into dinner for 2? "I'm not very hungry," Violet lied. "Maybe just toast?" "You need more than toast," Laura said, but her voice was defeated. She pulled out the eggs. "Scrambled eggs and toast, it's something." "That's good, Mom. I like eggs." They ate in silence at the small table, Violet having cleared her notebook and hidden it under her chair. The handkerchief bundle sat on the counter, looking like nothing more than laundry. "Mr. Jennings came by," Violet said quietly. Laura's fork stopped midway to her mouth. "What did he say?" "He said he needs $600 by Friday." Laura closed her eyes. "600? Is that true?" Violet asked. "Are we really that behind?" "We're managing," Laura said automatically, then caught herself. She'd promised herself she wouldn't lie to Violet about important things. "Yes, baby, we're behind. I got reduced hours last month when Mrs. Montgomery's daughter visited, and they didn't need as much cleaning. I'm picking up extra shifts this week." Can you get enough for 600 by Friday? Laura looked at her daughter, this small, serious child who understood far too much about money and struggle. I'll figure something out, I always do. But Violet saw the fear in her mother's eyes, the same fear she'd been seeing for months as their situation grew more desperate. Laura's car had been repossessed in August. The cable had been shut off in July. They'd been eating mostly rice and eggs for weeks. "Mom," Violet said carefully, "are you feeling okay?" "Just tired, honey. Long day." But Violet noticed things her mother tried to hide. The way Laura pressed her hand against her side when she stood, the tightness around her eyes, the way she'd lost weight she didn't have to lose. They washed dishes together, Violet standing on a step stool to reach the sink. Laura moved slowly, every motion deliberate, conserving energy. "Early bedtime tonight," Laura said. "I have to be at the estate by 6 tomorrow, big dinner party Friday night, and Mrs. Montgomery wants everything perfect." "Okay," Violet said. "I'll get ready for bed." She brushed her teeth with a worn toothbrush, changed into an oversized t-shirt that served as pajamas, and lay down on her mattress on the floor. Through the thin walls, she could hear the television from the next apartment, voices arguing somewhere above them. Laura came in and knelt beside Violet's mattress, smoothing her daughter's hair. "I love you more than anything in this world," she said. "I love you too, Mom." "Your daddy would be so proud of you," Laura whispered. "You're smart and brave and kind. Don't let anyone tell you different." After her mother fell asleep, Violet waited in the darkness, listening to Laura's breathing deepen. Then she slipped out of bed, grabbed her notebook and a flashlight from the kitchen drawer, and returned to the table. She uncovered the pistol and studied it in the flashlight's beam, taking more notes, sketching details. The clock on the wall ticked past midnight before she finally allowed herself to sleep, her head pillowed on her arms at the table, the M1911 inches from her face. In 3 days, she would give Eddie his pistol for his birthday. In 3 days, Malcolm Jennings would demand $600 or start eviction. Violet had 3 days to do impossible things. She'd start tomorrow with making parts from whatever she could find. Tuesday morning arrived gray and cold, the kind of November dawn that promised winter's arrival. Violet woke at the kitchen table, her cheek pressed against her notebook, leaving an impression of pencil sketches on her skin. The apartment was silent except for the drip of the bathroom faucet, a sound that had become white noise. She rubbed her eyes and checked the clock, 5:47 a.m. Her mother would wake in 13 minutes. Violet quickly covered the pistol with its handkerchief, gathered her tools and notebook, and returned everything to the bedroom closet. By the time Laura emerged from the bathroom, Violet was back in bed, eyes closed, breathing steady. Laura moved through her morning routine with mechanical efficiency: shower, dress in the black pants and white polo, tie her hair back, apply the minimal makeup that Mrs. Montgomery expected. She paused at Violet's mattress, kneeling to kiss her daughter's forehead. "See you tonight, baby girl," Laura whispered. "There's oatmeal in the cabinet. Be good." The apartment door clicked shut. Violet counted to 60, then rose and went to the window, watching her mother's small figure cross the parking lot toward the bus stop. Laura walked with a limp this morning, favoring her right side. Violet made herself oatmeal with water instead of milk, adding a spoonful of sugar they could barely afford. She ate standing at the counter, her mind already working through the repair strategy she'd formulated during the night. The firing mechanism of the M1911 was elegantly simple when functioning correctly. The trigger released the sear, which freed the hammer to strike the firing pin, which struck the primer of the cartridge. But the slide's refusal to retract meant she couldn't access the internal components through normal field stripping. She needed an alternative entry point. Violet retrieved the pistol and examined the grip panels. These were held by screws she could remove, granting access to the magazine well and some internal parts from below. It wasn't ideal, but her father had taught her that sometimes you approached a problem from an unexpected angle. Using the smallest screwdriver from her father's kit, she carefully removed the grip panel screws. The wood panels came away, revealing the frame's interior. Through the magazine well, she could see the hammer mechanism, the trigger assembly, and, there, a piece of metal that looked wrong. Violet squinted, bringing the flashlight closer. A broken fragment of the slide stop lever had sheared off and lodged itself between the slide and frame rail. No wonder the slide wouldn't move. The fragment was acting as a wedge. "Found you," Violet whispered. She sketched the problem in her notebook, noting the fragment's position. Removing it would require a tool thin enough to slide into the narrow gap. Something like a dental pick. She didn't have a dental pick, but she had bobby pins. Violet went to her mother's side of their shared bedroom and found the small zippered pouch where Laura kept hair accessories. 3 bobby pins remained, black metal with the rubber tips removed from years of use. Violet took one, examining its thickness and flexibility. Back at the kitchen table, she used her father's file to sharpen one end of the bobby pin, creating a narrow hook. The metal was soft, not ideal, but it might work for a single use. She documented the modification in her notebook, drawing the before and after shapes. The real challenge would be getting the hook behind the metal fragment without pushing it deeper into the mechanism. She'd have one chance. If the fragment fell into the wrong position, she might make the problem worse. Violet spent an hour practicing the motion on a piece of cardboard, using a nail to simulate the fragment and the modified bobby pin to hook it. Her hands were steady, muscle memory from hundreds of sessions with her father guiding her movements. At 7:30, she stopped to get dressed for school. The day stretched ahead like an obstacle, hours she had to endure before returning to the real work. She packed her backpack, locked the apartment, and walked to the bus stop. Mrs. Kimball was outside smoking, wrapped in a blanket against the chill. "Morning, sunshine. Cold enough for you?" "Yes, ma'am," Violet said, stamping her feet to stay warm. "Your mama looked peaked this morning," Betty observed, flicking ash from her cigarette. "She feeling all right?" "Just tired from work," Violet said, the automatic defense. Betty gave her a knowing look but didn't press. "You tell her Betty says hello, and if y'all need anything?" "We're fine, but thank you," Violet said quickly. Accepting help felt like admitting defeat, like confirming what people whispered, that Laura Shaw couldn't take care of her daughter. The bus arrived, belching diesel exhaust. Violet climbed aboard and took her usual seat near the back, pulling out her library book to avoid eye contact with the other children. Derek Matthews and Trevor Hughes boarded at the next stop, their voices loud with the particular cruelty of boys who'd identified an easy target. They shoved past Violet to the back row, Derek deliberately bumping her shoulder. "Watch it, weird Shaw," he muttered. Violet kept her eyes on her book, reading the same sentence over and over without comprehending the words. Jefferson Elementary School was a sprawling single-story building painted institutional beige, its playground dominated by cracked asphalt and rusting equipment. Violet filed off the bus with the other second graders, heading to Mrs. Reed's classroom. Dorothy Reed was 45, a veteran teacher who'd seen enough struggling children to recognize the signs. She watched Violet enter, noting the girl's worn jacket, the too thin frame, the exhaustion in eyes that should have held only childhood wonder. "Good morning, Violet," Mrs. Reed said warmly. "Did you finish your reading assignment?" "Yes, ma'am," Violet said, handing over a worksheet covered in careful handwriting. Mrs. Reed scanned the answers. All correct, naturally. Violet Shaw was reading at a 6th grade level, while her classmates struggled through basic chapter books. But academic excellence couldn't shield a child from the other struggles of poverty. The morning crawled by math, reading, a science lesson about simple machines that Violet already understood from her father's teachings about mechanical advantage. During lunch in the cafeteria, Violet sat alone at the end of a table, eating the peanut butter sandwich she'd made that morning. Chloe Anderson approached, tray in hand. Chloe was a quiet girl with dark hair and glasses, another outsider in the brutal social hierarchy of elementary school. "Can I sit here?" "Okay," Violet said. They ate in companionable silence for a moment before Chloe spoke. "Derek's telling everyone you were talking to a homeless man in the park yesterday." Violet's jaw tightened. He wasn't homeless, and it's none of Derek's business. "I know," Chloe said. "Derek's just mean. My mom says he's like that because his dad is mean to him, but I don't think that's an excuse." "It's not," Violet agreed. "What were you really doing?" Chloe asked, curiosity overcoming discretion. Violet hesitated. She wanted to tell someone, to share the excitement of the project, but instinct warned against it. "Just talking about my dad. The man is a veteran." "Oh," Chloe said, "that's nice. My grandpa was in Vietnam." The conversation shifted to safer topics: homework, a movie Chloe had watched, the unfairness of only getting 15 minutes for recess. For a brief window, Violet felt almost normal, almost like a regular kid discussing regular things. The feeling shattered when Derek and Trevor passed their table. Derek grabbed Violet's notebook from beside her tray, holding it above his head. "Give it back," Violet said, standing. "What's in here?" Derek taunted, flipping pages. "More drawings of guns? You're so weird." "I said give it back." Violet's voice was steady, but her heart hammered. The notebook contained nothing about the pistol. She'd been careful, but it was hers. Her father's lessons transcribed in her handwriting, and Derek's hands on it felt like violation. "Make me," Derek said, backing away. Mr. Marcus Reed, the school janitor who happened to be Mrs. Reed's husband, appeared from the cafeteria's kitchen entrance. He was a solid man in his 50s with kind eyes and no tolerance for bullying. "Matthews," Marcus said, his voice carrying authority despite its softness. "Hand over the notebook, now." Derek's bravado crumbled in the face of adult intervention. He shoved the notebook at Violet. "Whatever, it's just boring stuff anyway." Marcus waited until Derek and Trevor had returned to their table before speaking to Violet. "You all right, Miss Shaw?" "Yes, sir, thank you." "That boy needs a firmer hand than he's getting," Marcus muttered. "You need anything, you come find me, understand?" Violet nodded, clutching her notebook. The rest of the school day passed without incident. Violet counted down the minutes until 3:15, when the dismissal bell finally rang and she could board the bus home. The apartment welcomed her with its familiar cold silence. Violet dropped her backpack, grabbed a granola bar from the dwindling box in the cabinet, and returned to her work. She positioned the pistol on a clean dish towel, arranged her tools, and studied the lodged fragment through the magazine well. The makeshift hook glinted in the overhead light, its filed point sharp enough for the task. Violet took 3 deep breaths, steadying herself. Her father's voice echoed in memory. "Patience and precision. Rush, and you'll cause damage. Take your time." She inserted the bobby pin hook through the magazine well, angling it upward. The metal scraped against the frame's interior, a sound that made her wince. Slowly, carefully, she worked the hook behind the fragment. Contact. The hook found purchase on the broken piece. Violet applied gentle pressure, pulling downward. The fragment resisted, held by friction and the slide's pressure. She adjusted her angle, trying different leverage points, sweat beading on her forehead despite the apartment's chill. 30 minutes of painstaking effort yielded nothing. The fragment refused to budge. Violet sat back, frustrated. Her father had taught her that when a direct approach failed, you reconsidered your assumptions. What was she missing? She examined the problem from a new perspective. The fragment was wedged between slide and frame, held by compression. To remove it, she needed to reduce that compression. But she couldn't retract the slide because the fragment prevented movement. Unless she could create space through a different mechanism, the takedown lever. If she could engage it, it would slightly release the slide's tension on the frame, potentially creating enough gap to extract the fragment. Violet studied the takedown lever's position. It was stiff, years of use and lack of maintenance making it difficult to rotate. She needed leverage, something thin enough to fit into the lever's serration but strong enough to apply force. Her eyes fell on the nail file in her father's toolkit. The metal file's edge might catch the takedown lever's grooves. She positioned the file and applied careful pressure. The lever resisted, then suddenly rotated a quarter turn. The slide made a subtle shift, a millimeter of movement, but it was enough. Violet immediately inserted the bobby pin hook, finding the fragment again. This time, with the reduced pressure, the broken piece moved. She pulled gently, feeling it slide along the frame rail, emerging slowly from its prison. The fragment fell onto the dish towel, a jagged piece of metal no bigger than a fingernail, but capable of disabling an entire weapon. "Yes," Violet breathed, her hands shaking with relief. She set the fragment aside and tested the slide. It moved freely now, gliding back with the smooth action it was designed for. The pistol could now be properly field-stripped. Violet worked quickly, disassembling the weapon into its major components: slide, barrel, recoil spring, and guide frame. Each piece received careful examination and cleaning with a torn strip of t-shirt and drops of cooking oil from the kitchen cabinet. The internal parts told stories of decades of use. The extractor was worn, its hook edge rounded. The hammer spring had lost tension. The barrel's rifling showed erosion, but the fundamental structure remained sound. This weapon had been built to last, and careful maintenance had kept it functional long past its expected service life. Violet documented everything in her notebook, sketching each component, noting wear patterns. Her father had taught her that understanding deterioration helped predict future failures. The extractor was the most critical concern. Its job was to pull the spent cartridge casing from the chamber, and the worn hook might fail under use. She needed to restore that hook sharpness. Using her finest file, Violet carefully reshaped the extractor's hook, removing damaged metal and creating a fresh edge. The work was delicate, requiring patience and a steady hand. One wrong stroke could ruin the part. An hour passed. The light outside shifted from afternoon gold to early evening gray. Violet's stomach growled, but she ignored it, focused entirely on the tiny piece of metal in her grip. Finally, satisfied with the extractor's new profile, she held it up to the light. The hook was sharp again, capable of gripping a cartridge rim. Footsteps in the hallway made her look up. Not her mother's light tread, but something heavier. The footsteps stopped at their door. 3 pounding knocks, aggressive and familiar. Violet quickly covered the disassembled pistol with the dish towel and approached the door. Through the peephole, Malcolm Jennings' distorted face glared back. "I know you're in there, kid," Malcolm said. "I saw you come home from school." Violet didn't respond, didn't open the door. "You tell your mother I want to talk to her tonight," Malcolm continued. "No more excuses. 600 by Friday, or I'm filing paperwork. And tell her not to bother begging. I've heard it all before." He stomped away, his heavy boots echoing in the stairwell. Violet returned to the table, but her hands were shaking now, making fine work impossible. She carefully reassembled what she'd cleaned, leaving the worn parts that needed attention for tomorrow. Laura came home at 6:30, moving even slower than the night before. Her face was pale, drawn, and when she hugged Violet in greeting, her skin felt feverish. "Mom, you're burning up," Violet said. "Just hot from the bus," Laura said, but she swayed slightly, gripping the counter for balance. "You need to see a doctor." "I need to work," Laura corrected. She opened the refrigerator, staring at the same meager contents as yesterday. "How about rice and eggs again? I can make it special. Add some of that hot sauce." "That sounds good," Violet lied. They ate quietly, the television's absence making every sound sharp. Forks, scraping plates, the refrigerator's hum, the couple arguing upstairs. "Mr. Jennings came by," Violet said. Laura's fork paused. "What did he say this time?" "Same thing, 600 by Friday." "I'm working on it," Laura said, but her voice held no conviction. "Mrs. Montgomery's daughter is paying me extra to clean out the guest house this week. And I picked up 2 shifts at Murphy's Diner for Saturday and Sunday morning." "Mom, you can barely stand up. How are you going to work 6 days straight?" "Because I have to," Laura snapped, then immediately softened. "I'm sorry, baby. I'm just tired. But we're going to be okay, I promise." Violet wanted to believe her, wanted to trust that the universe would somehow provide. But she'd learned that promises couldn't pay rent, couldn't cure illness, couldn't fill an empty refrigerator. After dinner, while her mother soaked in a bath trying to ease the pain that was clearly intensifying, Violet returned to her work. She'd successfully removed the fragment and cleaned the major components. Tomorrow she'd focus on the worn parts that needed replacement or modification. The hammer spring was her biggest concern. It was weakened, which would cause misfires if Eddie ever fired the weapon. Springs were complex. They required specific tension, specific material properties. She couldn't simply replace it with a random spring. But maybe she could reinforce it. Violet searched the apartment, looking for materials. In the bathroom's junk drawer, she found a pen that had run out of ink. Inside was a small spring. She tested its tension, stronger than the hammer spring, but too short. In her mother's sewing kit, she found safety pins. Their springs were tiny, but surprisingly robust. An idea began forming. If she could nest a secondary spring inside the hammer spring, it might restore the lost tension without requiring a complete replacement. She sketched the concept in her notebook, working through the physics. The nested spring would need to fit inside the hammer spring's coils without binding, providing support without interfering with the hammer's travel. It was a hack, a field expedient repair that would make a proper gunsmith cringe. But her father had served in combat zones where proper parts weren't available, where armorers kept weapons running with wire, tape, and ingenuity. "Make do with what you have," Violet whispered. She carefully disassembled 3 safety pins, extracting their springs. Using needle-nose pliers, she connected them end to end, creating a longer spring. Then she tested it inside the hammer spring, checking the fit. Perfect. The improvised reinforcement nested snugly, adding tension without binding. Violet allowed herself a small smile. 2 days remained until Eddie's birthday. The pistol was coming back to life. Laura emerged from the bathroom wearing an oversized t-shirt, her wet hair wrapped in a towel. She looked marginally better, the hot bath having eased some of the visible pain. "Time for bed, baby girl," Laura said. "School tomorrow." "Okay, Mom." They went through their nighttime routine, teeth brushing, tucking in, the whispered "I love yous" that were ritual and talisman both. But Violet didn't sleep. She lay on her mattress, staring at the ceiling, listening to her mother's breathing shift from waking sounds to the deeper rhythms of exhausted sleep. Then she rose and returned to the kitchen. The work continued under the single overhead bulb, Violet's small hands moving with precision beyond her years. She installed the reinforced spring, testing the hammer's action. The trigger pull was crisp now, the hammer falling with authority. She moved to the next component, then the next, each piece receiving her complete attention. The pile of cleaned, repaired parts grew. Outside, Riverside settled into night. The sounds changed. Less traffic, more distant sirens, the occasional shout from the street. The building's radiator clanked futilely, providing more noise than heat. At midnight, Violet finally allowed herself to stop. The pistol was mostly reassembled, only final adjustments remaining. She covered it with a handkerchief, put away her tools, and crawled into bed. Sleep came quickly, dreamless and deep. Wednesday morning brought rain, cold drops that promised an early winter. Violet woke to find her mother already gone. A note on the kitchen counter. Oatmeal in cabinet. "Love you more than the world. Mom." The note's handwriting was shakier than usual. Violet made her oatmeal, packed her lunch, another peanut butter sandwich, and gathered her school things. The pistol sat covered on the counter, waiting for tonight's final session. The bus ride was quiet, rain streaming down the windows. Derek and Trevor were subdued, their meanness dampened by the weather. Violet read her book, occasionally glancing at the rain-soaked streets. School passed in a blur of lessons she already understood. During math, while other students struggled with 2-digit multiplication, Violet's mind worked through the mechanical advantage of the M1911's toggle link system, calculating force vectors. At lunch, Chloe sat with her again. "You seem happy today," Chloe observed. "Do I?" Violet asked. "Yeah, less sad than usual." Violet considered this. She was happy, she realized. The pistol project had given her purpose, connection to her father, proof that she inherited his gift. For 3 days, she'd been an armorer like him, solving problems, creating solutions. "I'm working on something," Violet admitted. "A project. It's going well." "What kind of project?" "I can't really say yet, but when it's done, someone's going to be really surprised." "That sounds mysterious," Chloe said, intrigued. They finished lunch and headed to afternoon classes. The rain intensified, drumming on the school's roof, creating a steady rhythm that made concentration difficult for everyone except Violet, who found the sound soothing. At 3:15, she boarded the bus for home, clutching her backpack, mentally reviewing the final adjustments needed for the pistol. The apartment was cold and dark. Violet turned on lights, cranked the oven to 350 degrees, and left the door open for heat, and retrieved the pistol from its hiding spot. Today was about perfection. The weapon functioned now, but function wasn't enough. Eddie had carried this pistol for 57 years. It deserved to work smoothly, reliably, as close to factory specifications as Violet could achieve. She spent 2 hours on fine adjustments, polishing contact surfaces, ensuring springs seated properly, checking tolerances. The cooking oil served as temporary lubricant, not ideal but functional until Eddie could apply proper gun oil. The final test was the trigger pull. Violet carefully aimed the unloaded weapon at the far wall, always maintaining safe direction even with an inert tool, and pressed the trigger. The hammer fell with a clean snap. No grittiness, no hesitation. Perfect. She repeated the test a dozen times, checking for consistency. Each time, the mechanism performed flawlessly. Violet allowed herself a genuine smile. She'd done it. A 7-year-old with improvised tools and makeshift parts had repaired a weapon that defeated professional gunsmiths. Her father would have been proud. The front door's lock rattled, and Laura entered carrying grocery bags. Violet quickly covered the pistol. "Got paid today," Laura said, setting the bags on the counter. "Not much, but enough for real food." She began unpacking a small chicken, fresh vegetables, rice, milk, a box of macaroni and cheese. Luxuries they hadn't seen in weeks. "Mom, this is too much," Violet said, worried. "What about the rent?" "Let me worry about rent," Laura said. "Tonight, we eat like normal people." But Violet saw the truth in her mother's eyes. This wasn't celebration. It was Last Supper, one good meal before everything fell apart. Laura knew she couldn't make $600 by Friday. She knew eviction was coming. This dinner was goodbye to their home. They cooked together, Violet helping chop vegetables while Laura prepared the chicken. The apartment filled with smells that reminded Violet of better times, of when her father was alive and money wasn't a daily terror. They ate at the small table, the pistol hidden in the bedroom now. Laura tried to maintain cheerful conversation, asking about school, praising Violet's help with dinner, but exhaustion and pain painted shadows under her eyes. "Mom," Violet said carefully, "what happens if we can't pay Mr. Jennings?" Laura's fork stilled. For a long moment she didn't answer. Then, "We'll figure something out. Maybe I can talk to him, work out a payment plan." "You've tried that before." "Then we'll find somewhere else to live. There are shelters, programs for families." "I don't want to live in a shelter." "I know, baby. Neither do I." Laura reached across the table, taking Violet's small hand. "But whatever happens, we have each other. That's what matters. Not this apartment, not Mr. Jennings, not any of it. As long as we're together, we'll be okay." Violet wanted to believe it. She nodded, squeezing her mother's hand. After dinner, Laura retreated to bed early, her fever clearly returning. Violet cleaned the kitchen, washing dishes with meticulous care, then retrieved the pistol for final preparations. Tomorrow was Thursday, Eddie's birthday, and the day she'd promised to return his weapon. She needed to present it properly, with respect for its history. Violet found a shoebox in the closet and lined it with a clean dish towel. She carefully placed the pistol inside, adding her notebook opened to a page showing detailed diagrams of her repairs. Eddie would want to know what she'd done, what parts she'd modified. She wrote a note on a separate page. "Happy birthday, Eddie. Your pistol is fixed. All parts cleaned, fragment removed, springs reinforced, extractor resharpened. It should work as good as new. Thank you for trusting me. Violet Shaw." She placed the note on top of the pistol and closed the shoebox. Tomorrow afternoon, she'd meet Eddie at the park. She'd give him his birthday present. And maybe, somehow, the universe would reward this small good deed with a miracle for her family. Violet knew that was childish thinking. Fixing a pistol wouldn't pay their rent. But for tonight, completing the project felt like victory. She went to bed with a sense of accomplishment, the shoebox hidden in her closet, waiting for tomorrow. In the next room, Laura lay awake, pressing her hand against the pain in her side that had grown from discomfort to agony. She knew she needed a doctor. She knew the pain wasn't just fatigue. But doctors cost money, and money was for rent, for food, for keeping her daughter safe. She'd deal with her health after they survived Friday. Laura closed her eyes and prayed to a God she wasn't sure listened anymore, asking for just one more miracle, one more month, one more chance to keep her daughter housed and fed. Outside, the rain continued, washing the streets of Riverside, washing away the day's dirt but solving none of the night's problems. Thursday dawned with cruel brightness, sunlight cutting through the apartment windows like an accusation. Violet woke to find her mother hadn't gone to work. Laura lay in bed, curled on her side, her face gray and slick with sweat. "Mom?" Violet whispered, touching her mother's shoulder. Laura's eyes opened, unfocused. "Baby, I can't get up. I tried. I can't." Terror flooded through Violet's chest. Her mother never stayed in bed. Laura worked through flu, through migraines, through the grinding exhaustion that had become her constant companion. If she couldn't rise, something was desperately wrong. "I'm calling 911, Violet said. "No," Laura's hand shot out, gripping Violet's wrist with surprising strength. "Ambulance costs money we don't have." "I just need rest. It'll pass." "You need a doctor." "Tomorrow," Laura whispered. "After I deal with Jennings, after we figure out the rent, just let me sleep." Violet stood helpless, watching her mother's breathing shallow and rapid. She went to the bathroom, soaked a washcloth in cold water, and placed it on Laura's forehead. Her mother didn't respond. The clock read 7:15. Violet should be getting ready for school, but leaving her mother alone felt impossible. She paced the small apartment, anxiety building pressure behind her eyes. A knock at the door made her jump. Through the peephole, she saw Mrs. Kimball still in her bathrobe, concern etched across her weathered face. Violet opened the door. "Heard your mama coughing through the walls last night," Betty said without preamble. "She all right?" "She's sick," Violet admitted, the words catching in her throat. "Really sick. But she won't let me call anyone." Betty pushed past Violet, moving into the bedroom with the authority of a woman who'd nursed her own husband through his final illness. She placed her hand on Laura's forehead, checked her pulse, lifted her eyelids. "This child needs proper care," Betty said to Violet. "How long's she been this bad?" "Getting worse all week, but today she can't get up." Betty's expression hardened. "This is beyond home remedies. Where's your phone?" "We don't have one." "Course you don't." Betty straightened with effort, her arthritis protesting. "I'm calling from my apartment. You stay with your mama." She left, moving faster than Violet had seen her move before. Through the thin walls, Violet heard Betty's muffled voice, urgent and insistent. Minutes stretched. Violet sat on the edge of the bed, holding her mother's hand. Laura's skin was paper dry, burning. "I fixed Eddie's pistol," Violet whispered, needing to fill the silence with something. "Today's his birthday. I was supposed to meet him at 4, give him his present." Laura's eyes flickered. "Your dad would be proud," she murmured. "So proud of you." "Don't talk like you're going somewhere," Violet said, fear sharpening her voice. "You're going to be fine." Betty returned with a younger woman in tow, Carolyn Fletcher, the social worker Violet recognized from school visits. Carolyn's presence meant intervention, meant the system becoming aware of their situation. Violet's stomach nodded. "Hi, Violet," Carolyn said gently, crouching to the girl's level. "Mrs. Kimball is worried about your mom. Can you tell me what's happening?" Violet looked between the adults, weighing her words. The truth might bring help. It might also bring foster care, separation, the destruction of what remained of her family. "She has a fever," Violet said carefully. "She worked too hard this week." Carolyn moved to Laura's bedside, conducting her own assessment. Her professional mask slipped, revealing alarm. "Laura, can you hear me? Do you know where you are?" Laura's response was incoherent, mumbling. Carolyn pulled out her phone. "I'm calling an ambulance. This is an emergency." "We can't afford," Violet started. "That doesn't matter right now," Carolyn interrupted, already dialing. "Your mother needs immediate medical attention." The next 30 minutes blurred into chaos. Paramedics arrived, their radios crackling, equipment clattering. They lifted Laura onto a stretcher, asking questions Violet struggled to answer. Medical history? Unknown. Allergies? None that Violet knew of. Insurance? Violet had no idea. "I'm coming with her," Violet insisted as they wheeled Laura toward the door. "You can't ride in the ambulance, honey," one paramedic said, not unkindly. "Is there family who can take you to the hospital?" "There's no one," Violet said, panic rising. "Just us." Carolyn stepped in. "I'll bring her." "Riverside Community Hospital?" "Correct," the paramedic confirmed. They carried Laura away. Violet watched from the doorway as the stretcher navigated the stairwell, her mother's small form strapped down, an oxygen mask covering her face. Betty gripped Violet's shoulder. "Get your things, sweetheart. You need to go with Ms. Fletcher." Violet ran back inside, grabbing her backpack. She paused, looking at the closet where the shoebox with Eddie's pistol waited. She'd promised to meet him at 4. She'd promised to return his weapon. She pulled the shoebox from its hiding place and tucked it under her arm. Carolyn's car was a sensible sedan that smelled of coffee and air freshener. Violet clutched the shoebox in her lap as they drove through Riverside's morning traffic, following the ambulance's distant sirens. "Your mom works at the Montgomery estate?" Carolyn asked, her tone conversational, but Violet recognized the professional data gathering underneath. "Yes, ma'am. And she's been working this week despite being ill." "She had to. We're behind on rent." Carolyn's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "How far behind?" $600. "Mr. Jennings, that's our landlord, said he's filing eviction papers tomorrow if we don't pay." "I see." Carolyn's voice held layers of anger directed nowhere near Violet. "And there's no other family? Grandparents? Aunts? Uncles?" "My dad's parents died before I was born. My mom's parents didn't approve of her marrying a soldier. They haven't talked in years." "What's in the box?" Carolyn asked, noticing Violet's protective grip. "A birthday present for a friend. Must be a good friend." "He trusted me with something important," Violet said. "I can't let him down." They arrived at Riverside Community Hospital, a squat concrete building that served the military community and the town's working poor. The emergency room entrance was busy even this early. Ambulances parked at angles, people in various states of distress waiting on benches. Carolyn led Violet through automatic doors into fluorescent brightness and antiseptic smell. A nurse directed them to a waiting area while Laura was taken for immediate evaluation. Violet sat on an orange plastic chair, the shoebox balanced on her knees, watching medical staff move with purposeful urgency. Time became meaningless, measured only by the clock on the wall that seemed to move both too fast and too slow. At 10:30, a doctor emerged. Dr. Helen Carpenter was 48, her face kind but exhausted from years of emergency medicine. She looked at Carolyn, then at Violet, clearly uncertain which person was the appropriate recipient of information. "Are you Laura Shaw's daughter?" Dr. Carpenter asked Violet. "Yes, ma'am. Your mother is very sick. She has a severe infection that spread to her bloodstream, sepsis. We're giving her antibiotics and fluids, but she needs to be admitted. It's going to be a few days before we know the full extent of the situation." "Can I see her?" Violet asked. "Soon. We're getting her stable first." Dr. Carpenter crouched down. "Violet, this infection didn't happen overnight. Your mom's been dealing with this for weeks, maybe longer. Do you know why she didn't see a doctor sooner?" "Because doctors cost money," Violet said simply, "and we needed money for rent and food." Dr. Carpenter's jaw tightened. She exchanged a look with Carolyn that spoke volumes about systemic failures and impossible choices. "I need to ask you some questions," Carolyn said after the doctor left. "About your living situation, your safety. It's important you answer honestly." The interview was thorough but gentle. Carolyn asked about meals, how often, what kind, about supervision, who watched Violet when Laura worked, about school, about friends, about whether anyone had ever hurt her. Violet answered truthfully, understanding that lies would only complicate things. "You're a very responsible young lady," Carolyn said when they finished. "You've been taking care of your mother instead of the other way around." "She takes care of me," Violet defended. "She works really hard." "I can see that. But Violet, while your mom recovers, we need to make sure you're safe. I'm gonna have to place you in temporary foster care." "No." The word came out sharp, final. "I'm staying with my mom." "The hospital won't allow a child to stay overnight." "Then I'll sleep in the waiting room. I'm not leaving her." Carolyn sighed, recognizing the futility of arguing with determination that had been forged in survival. "Let me make some calls. Maybe we can find a solution." She left Violet in the waiting area and stepped outside to use her phone. Through the windows, Violet watched her pace, animated conversation with someone on the other end. The clock crept toward noon. Violet hadn't eaten, hadn't been to school, hadn't done anything except sit and wait and worry. Her hands rested on the shoebox, drawing comfort from its solidity. At 12:45, a nurse approached. "Violet Shaw, your mom's asking for you." Violet followed the nurse through double doors into the emergency department proper. The space was divided by curtains, each bay containing a patient, the sound of suffering mixing into a discordant symphony, moans, coughs, the beep of monitors. Laura lay in the fourth bay, connected to multiple lines, IV in her arm, oxygen tubes in her nose, heart monitor electrodes on her chest. Her eyes were closed, her face still pale but no longer gray. "Mom?" Violet whispered, approaching the bed. Laura's eyes opened. "Baby girl!" Her voice was hoarse but clearer than this morning. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." "You don't have to be sorry. I should have gone to the doctor weeks ago. I just kept thinking it would get better, that we couldn't afford it, that I had to keep working." Tears tracked down Laura's cheeks. What kind of mother can't even take care of herself? "The kind who takes care of her daughter first," Violet said firmly. "You always made sure I had food, even when you didn't eat. You always made sure I had clean clothes, a safe place. You did everything right." "Not everything." Laura's hand found Violet's. "Miss Fletcher says they might have to put you in foster care while I recover." "I won't go. I'll run away first." "You can't run. You have to be strong. Smarter than I was. You have to accept help when it's offered." A commotion outside the curtain interrupted them. Raised voices, someone insisting on entry. The curtain pulled back to reveal Malcolm Jennings, his face red with anger. "There you are," Malcolm said, pointing at Laura. "You think you can skip out on rent by faking sick?" "Mr. Jennings, this is a hospital," a nurse protested. "I don't care if it's the White House," Malcolm snarled. "She owes me money. Tomorrow's Friday. $600, or I'm emptying that apartment and changing the locks." "Can't you see she's in a hospital bed?" Violet said, her small voice carrying unexpected authority. "She's really sick. She almost died." "Not my problem," Malcolm said. "I got bills too. I got other tenants who pay on time. Why should she get special treatment?" "Because she's a human being," Violet said, fury overwhelming fear. "Because she works harder than anyone I know. Because the only reason she's sick is she couldn't afford to see a doctor while paying your rent." "Watch your mouth, kid," Malcolm warned. "That's enough." Dr. Carpenter appeared, her professional demeanor replaced by cold anger. "This is a medical facility. You are disrupting patient care. Leave now, or I'll have security remove you." "She still owes me." I said leave. Dr. Carpenter's voice could have frozen fire. Malcolm retreated, but not before delivering a parting shot. "Tomorrow at noon, $600 or everything goes to the curb." Silence followed his departure. Laura was crying soundlessly, her body shaking. Violet climbed onto the edge of the hospital bed, wrapping her arms around her mother. "We'll figure it out," Violet whispered, though she had no idea how. Dr. Carpenter returned after ensuring Malcolm had left the building. "I'm admitting your mother to the ICU for at least 48 hours. The infection is serious, and we need to monitor her closely." "Will she be okay?" Violet asked. "With treatment, yes, but it'll take time." Dr. Carpenter looked at Carolyn, who'd rejoined them. "About the daughter." "I'm working on arrangements," Carolyn said. "May need another hour." The afternoon progressed in painful increments. Laura was moved to the ICU, a unit Violet couldn't access. Carolyn made endless phone calls, coordinating placement options, arguing with bureaucracy. At 3:30, Violet looked at the clock and realized she'd missed her meeting with Eddie. 4 o'clock had been their agreement, and she was trapped in a hospital with no way to contact him. "I need to go to the park," Violet told Carolyn. "I promised to meet someone at 4. "Violet, I can't let you leave." "Please," desperation crept into her voice. "It's really important. It's his birthday, and I promised." Carolyn studied her. "Who is this person?" "A veteran. His name is Eddie. I fixed his pistol, and today I'm supposed to give it back." Carolyn's expression shifted to alarm. "You have a pistol? Here?" "It's not loaded. The firing pin isn't even in it. It's just parts that I repaired." Violet opened the shoebox, showing the wrapped weapon and her notebook. "See? It's a restoration project. Like art." Carolyn examined the contents, clearly out of her depth. "This is unusual. My dad taught me. He was an armorer in the army. This is what I know how to do." After a long moment, Carolyn made a decision. "I'll drive you to the park. We'll meet your friend, you'll give him his property, and then we deal with your living situation. Agreed?" "Agreed." They left the hospital at 3:50, speeding through Riverside streets. Carolyn drove with one hand on the wheel, the other holding her phone to her ear, still coordinating Violet's placement. They reached Veterans Memorial Park at 4:07. Eddie sat on their usual bench, his blue windbreaker zipped against the November chill. He stood when he saw them approach, his expression shifting from relief to concern when he noticed Violet's disheveled appearance and the professional-looking woman beside her. "Violet," Eddie said, "I was worried. You're never late." "I'm sorry." Violet clutched the shoebox. "My mom's in the hospital. Everything's been crazy today." Eddie's attention sharpened. "Is she all right?" "She has sepsis. They're keeping her in the ICU." Violet held out the shoebox. "But I finished your pistol. Happy birthday." Eddie took the box with careful hands, opening it to reveal the wrapped weapon in the notebook page with Violet's detailed explanations. He unwrapped the M1911, his trained eyes immediately recognizing the quality of the work. He partially disassembled the weapon right there, checking Violet's repairs with professional scrutiny. The fragment removal, the cleaned components, the reinforced springs, the resharpened extractor, all of it executed with precision that belied the improvisational methods. "This is remarkable," Eddie said quietly. "Violet, this is professional-grade work, better than professional. This is artisan restoration." "Will it work?" Violet asked. "I'll need to test-fire it to be certain, but based on what I'm seeing, yes, absolutely." He looked at her with an expression Violet couldn't quite read. "Your father taught you very well." "I'm Miss Fletcher, with Child Protective Services." Carolyn interjected, clearly uncomfortable with the weapon in the open. "Mr. Bancroft," Eddie said, extending his hand. "Edward Bancroft." They shook hands, Carolyn's professional assessment taking in Eddie's bearing, his obvious military background, his genuine concern for Violet. "Violet mentioned you're a veteran," Carolyn said. "Among other things." Eddie looked at Violet. "Tell me about your mother. What happened?" Violet explained. The weeks of worsening illness, Laura's refusal to see a doctor, the financial pressure, the eviction threat. Eddie listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker. "And you're in foster care now?" Eddie asked. "Ms. Fletcher is trying to find placement," Violet said. "But I don't want to go anywhere. I want to stay near my mom." Eddie was quiet for a long moment, weighing something internal. Then he pulled out his phone. "Walter, it's me. I need you to come to Veterans Memorial Park. Bring the car. And, Walter, bring my identification portfolio." He hung up and turned to Carolyn. "I'd like to discuss Violet's situation. But first, I need to show you something." "Mr. Bancroft, I appreciate your concern, but this is a CPS matter." "Just give me 10 minutes, Eddie said. There was command in his voice now, decades of authority surfacing. 10 minutes, and then you can make whatever decisions you need to. A black sedan pulled up to the curb 5 minutes later. Walter Harrison emerged, carrying a leather folder. He looked younger than Eddie by nearly 20 years, moving with the efficiency of someone accustomed to military precision. "Sir," Walter said, handing over the folder, "is everything all right?" "We'll see," Eddie said. He opened the folder and handed several documents to Carolyn. Violet watched Carolyn's expression transform as she read, confusion giving way to shock, then to something approaching disbelief. She looked up at Eddie, down at the documents, then back at Eddie. "You're Lieutenant General Edward Bancroft," Carolyn said slowly, "as in the Edward Bancroft, former 3rd Corps commander, Presidential Medal of Freedom recipient. You're that, Eddie?" "Retired," Eddie said, "but yes." Violet looked between them, confused. "What's a lieutenant general?" 3 stars, Walter explained gently, one of the highest ranks in the Army. General Bancroft commanded over 40,000 soldiers. "I don't understand," Violet said. "You told me you were Eddie." "I am Eddie," he said, kneeling to her level. "That part was true. The rank is just a title, Violet. It doesn't change who I am." "But you let me call you Eddie. You sat on a park bench like a regular person." "I am a regular person," Eddie insisted. "I just happen to have had a career that came with responsibilities and recognition. But when I met you, I wasn't a general. I was just an old man with a broken pistol and a lot of memories." Violet's mind raced, recontextualizing everything. The bearing she'd noticed, the command in his voice, the way he assessed situations. Not just a veteran, but a leader of veterans. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked. "Because if I had, you might have treated me differently. You might have been intimidated, or overly respectful, or tried too hard. I wanted someone to see me, not my rank. And you did. You saw Eddie, the man who needed help. not General Bancroft, who people usually want something from. Carolyn was still processing, looking at the documents. "Sir, with all due respect, why are you involved in this situation?" "Because Violet Shaw helped me when she didn't have to," Eddie said, standing. "Because she trusted me with her father's knowledge, and I'm trusting her with the truth about who I am. And because—" He paused, pulling something else from the folder. It was a photograph, creased and faded. The image showed two soldiers in combat gear standing in front of a desert landscape. One was clearly a younger Eddie. The other— "That's my dad," Violet whispered, recognizing Richard Shaw despite the decade between the photo and his death. "Chief Warrant Officer Richard Shaw," Eddie said softly, "saved my life in Kandahar, September 2010. We were caught in an ambush. The vehicle in front of us hit an IED. Your father pulled me out of my vehicle before the secondary explosion hit. He took shrapnel meant for me." The world seemed to tilt. Violet stared at the photograph, at her father's smile, at Eddie's arm around his shoulder. "He died protecting you?" Violet asked, her voice barely audible. "Not directly, but the injuries he sustained that day, they led to complications years later. The internal scarring, the embedded shrapnel that couldn't be safely removed. When he died in 2022, it was technically equipment failure, but I've always known the truth." Eddie's voice was thick with emotion. "Your father died because of damage sustained saving my life." "You've been looking for us," Violet said, understanding dawning. "For 3 years," Eddie confirmed. "The Army privacy protocols made it difficult. I knew Shaw had a wife and young daughter, but tracking down specific individuals after a soldier's death, especially when the family moves. Walter and I have been searching, following leads, hitting dead ends." "And then I showed up in your park," Violet said, "and introduced yourself as the daughter of Chief Warrant Officer Richard Shaw, an armorer." Eddie smiled through his own tears. "I knew immediately. The universe gave me one more chance to keep the promise I made to your father." "What promise?" Violet whispered. "That I would watch over his family. That his sacrifice wouldn't leave you unprotected. That if he couldn't be there for you, I would stand in his place." Silence fell over the park. Carolyn wiped her eyes, the professional veneer completely gone. Walter stood at attention, his own expression betraying emotion. Violet held the photograph, tracing her father's face with one finger. "Your mother's medical bills," Eddie said, "taken care of. Your rent, current and future, taken care of. The eviction, Walter will handle that within the hour." "I can't accept charity," Violet said, echoing her mother's pride. "It's not charity," Eddie said firmly. "It's a debt. Your father saved my life, and I've spent 15 years building a foundation in his honor, waiting to find his family. This isn't charity, Violet. This is me finally fulfilling an obligation that's kept me awake every night for 3 years." "The Shaw Family Foundation," Walter added, "established 2011. We've been funding education and support for military families searching for you the entire time." Carolyn found her voice. "General, this is highly irregular. I still need to ensure Violet's immediate safety." "Violet will stay at my home," Eddie said, "under Walter's supervision and yours if necessary. My residence has been background checked 6 ways from Sunday for various security clearances. I have medical staff on call, chefs, security. Most importantly, I have space for a little girl who needs stability while her mother recovers." "Mom would never agree," Violet protested. "Then we'll ask her," Eddie said. "Right now, Walter, the car." They drove to the hospital in Eddie's sedan, Violet sandwiched between Carolyn and Eddie in the back seat, still clutching the photograph. The city passed in a blur, Violet's mind struggling to process the day's revelations. At the hospital, Eddie's presence changed everything. Nurses straightened, administrators materialized, and suddenly Dr. Carpenter was available immediately. They were escorted to the ICU, where visiting rules bent to accommodate a 3-star general. Laura lay in the hospital bed, looking smaller and more fragile under the harsh lights. When she saw Eddie, confusion crossed her face. When she saw Violet holding the photograph, tears began to fall. "Mrs. Shaw," Eddie said gently, "my name is Edward Bancroft. Your husband saved my life." And he told her the story, the ambush, the rescue, Richard's injuries, the years of searching. Laura listened, sobbing quietly, holding Violet's hand like a lifeline. "He never told me," Laura whispered. "He never said he saved a general." "He was a humble man," Eddie said. "The best kind of hero. The kind who doesn't seek recognition. But I've been seeking you, trying to honor the promise I made him. Please let me help your family now." The discussion was lengthy, Laura's pride warring with desperation and relief. But eventually, faced with medical bills she couldn't pay, eviction she couldn't stop, and a daughter who needed care she couldn't provide, Laura agreed. Violet would stay at Eddie's home, the rent would be paid, Laura's treatment would continue without financial burden. And when Laura was recovered, they would discuss permanent arrangements through the Shaw Family Foundation. As they prepared to leave, Violet turned back to her mother's bedside. "I fixed his pistol, Mom. Dad would be proud." "I'm proud," Laura whispered, "so incredibly proud." Eddie placed his hand on Violet's shoulder, a gesture that felt like benediction and promise both. Outside the ICU, Carolyn completed paperwork authorizing the temporary placement, her professional obligations satisfied by Eddie's credentials and obvious genuine care. They left the hospital as the sun set over Riverside, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Violet sat in the back of the sedan, watching the city pass, her world transformed in the space of a single day. She'd woken as a child facing eviction and her mother's death. She ended the day under the protection of a 3-star general who owed his life to her father. The universe, it seemed, sometimes kept score after all. The Bancroft residence occupied 3 acres in Riverside's Preston Hill district, where old money had built estates a century ago and new money tried to maintain them. The sedan passed through iron gates that opened automatically, following a curved driveway lined with maples that had turned brilliant gold. Violet pressed her face against the window, watching the house emerge from the November dusk. It was brick and stone, 2 stories with dormers suggesting a 3rd level, its windows glowing warm against the darkening sky. Not a mansion like the Montgomery estate, where her mother cleaned, but substantial, the home of someone who'd earned comfort through service rather than inheritance. "It's big," Violet said quietly. "Too big for one old man," Eddie agreed, "but its home has been for 30 years. Walter parked near a side entrance. He opened Violet's door, offering his hand to help her out. The evening air was crisp, carrying the scent of wood smoke from a chimney and the earthy smell of fallen leaves. Inside, warmth enveloped them. The entry hall's walls were painted soft cream, lined with framed photographs, military units, ceremonies, landscapes from places Violet didn't recognize. A wooden staircase curved upward, its banister polished to a deep shine. A woman emerged from a doorway to the left, wiping her hands on an apron. She was perhaps 60, with silver hair pulled into a practical bun and the kind face of someone accustomed to caring for others. "General," she said, then noticed Violet. Her expression softened immediately. "And who's this young lady?" "Agnes, this is Violet Shaw," Eddie said. "She'll be staying with us for a while." "Violet, this is Agnes Porter. She manages the household and makes the best pot roast you'll ever taste." "Hello, ma'am," Violet said, clutching her backpack. "Hello, sweetheart," Agnes said, crouching to Violet's level. "You look like you've had quite a day." "Are you hungry? I kept dinner warm." Violet's stomach answered for her, growling audibly. She hadn't eaten since the hospital's vending machine crackers at noon. "I'll take that as a yes," Agnes said with a gentle laugh. "Come on, let's get some food in you." The kitchen was larger than Violet's entire apartment, all granite countertops and stainless steel appliances that looked like they belonged in a restaurant. But Agnes had made it welcoming, with plants on the windowsill, a well-used cookbook stand, and the lingering aroma of home cooking. Agnes served pot roast with roasted vegetables and mashed potatoes, portions sized for a growing child, not the meager helpings Violet had learned to accept. She ate slowly at first, self-conscious, then with increasing hunger, as her body reminded her how long it had been since a proper meal. Eddie sat across from her, nursing coffee, watching with satisfaction. Walter stood by the counter, coordinating logistics on his phone in a low voice, confirming medical arrangements, contacting attorneys, dismantling the crisis that had threatened to destroy Violet's family. "There's a guest room prepared upstairs," Agnes said when Violet had finished. "It has its own bathroom, and I put out fresh towels. Tomorrow we can go shopping for clothes and whatever else you need." "I have clothes," Violet said quickly, thinking of the meager contents of her backpack. "I'm sure you do," Agnes said diplomatically, "but a girl should have options. Consider it part of your stay." After dinner, Agnes led Violet upstairs to the second floor. The guest room was twice the size of the bedroom Violet shared with her mother, furnished with a 4-poster bed, a desk, a reading chair by the window, and built-in bookshelves. "The bathroom's through that door," Agnes said, pointing. "I'll leave you to get settled. If you need anything at all, my room is down the hall, 3rd door on the right. Don't hesitate to knock." Alone, Violet stood in the center of the room, overwhelmed. The bed was piled with pillows and a thick comforter. The desk held new notebooks and a container of pens. The bookshelves were half filled with classics and contemporary novels, chosen for someone Violet's age. She went to the window, looking out over the backgrounds. A garden stretched below, dormant for winter but showing the structure of careful planning. Beyond that, trees marked the property's boundary, and through them, distant lights from the town proper. Her phone, except she didn't have a phone. The realization hit her that she had no way to check on her mother, no connection to the hospital. Panic fluttered in her chest until she remembered Walter's phone, his quiet coordination. If something happened, they would know. Violet unpacked her backpack, 2 changes of clothes, her notebook about the pistol repair, her library book about firearms history, and the photograph of her father with Eddie. She set the photo on the nightstand, propping it against the lamp. "I wish you were here," she whispered to her father's image. "You'd know what to do. You'd know if this is okay, accepting help from someone you saved. Mom says you never wanted charity, but Eddie says it's not charity, is it?" Her father smiled from the photograph. Forever young, forever in a desert far from this comfortable room. Violet brushed her teeth with a new toothbrush. Agnes had left on the bathroom counter, washed her face, and changed into her t-shirt nightgown. The bed was impossibly soft when she climbed in, the mattress cradling her exhausted body. She turned off the lamp and lay in darkness, listening to the house settle around her, the creak of old wood, the distant hum of heating, the whisper of wind against windows. Strange sounds, foreign comfort. Sleep came reluctantly, arriving only after tears she couldn't stop and didn't fully understand had soaked into the expensive pillowcase. Friday morning, Violet woke disoriented, her surroundings wrong. Then memory flooded back, her mother in the hospital, Eddie's revelation, this borrowed safety. She checked the bedside clock, 6:47 a.m. Downstairs, she found Agnes in the kitchen preparing breakfast. The older woman smiled when Violet appeared. "Good morning, honey. Did you sleep all right?" "Yes, ma'am. Is there news about my mom?" "Walter called the hospital an hour ago. Your mother had a stable night. The antibiotics are working and the doctors are optimistic. We'll visit after breakfast." Violet felt tension she hadn't known she was carrying begin to ease. "Can I help with breakfast?" Agnes looked surprised, then pleased. "You know how to cook?" "A little. Mom taught me scrambled eggs and toast." "Then you can be my assistant chef." They worked side by side, Agnes guiding Violet through making proper scrambled eggs. Low heat, patience, constant stirring. It reminded Violet of working with her father on mechanical projects, the same emphasis on technique and care. Eddie joined them at 8, dressed casually in khaki pants and a button-down shirt, looking more grandfather than general. They ate together at the kitchen's breakfast nook, morning light streaming through windows that overlooked the garden. "Today, we handle logistics," Eddie said. "First, the hospital to see your mother. Then we visit your apartment to collect your belongings. And we deal with Mr. Jennings." "He's going to be angry," Violet said. "Let him be angry. Anger directed at those who can withstand it is better than anger directed at those who can't." Eddie's expression hardened. "Walter's been researching Mr. Jennings' business practices. There are irregularities. Housing code violations, discriminatory rental practices, financial improprieties. The kind of irregularities that interest certain regulatory agencies." "You're going to get him in trouble?" Violet asked. "I'm going to ensure he faces consequences for his actions. There's a difference between being a strict landlord and being a predator who exploits vulnerable families." They drove to Riverside Community Hospital mid-morning, the same route Violet had taken yesterday, though it felt like weeks had passed. In the ICU, Laura was awake and alert, the gray pallor replaced by healthier color. "Baby girl," Laura said, her voice stronger. "Look at you. Did you sleep in a real bed?" The biggest bed ever, Violet said, climbing carefully onto the edge of her mother's bed for a hug, with about 1,000,000 pillows. I'm glad. Laura looked past Violet to Eddie, who stood respectfully back. General Bancroft, I've been thinking all night. This is too much. The medical bills, the housing, Violet's care. Mrs. Shaw, Eddie interrupted gently. With respect, it's not too much. It's insufficient payment for a debt I can never truly repay. Your husband gave me 15 years I wouldn't have had. 15 years to see my son grow up, to meet my grandchildren, to serve my country. What price would you put on 15 years of life? Laura's eyes filled. Richard would say you don't owe us anything. He'd say he was just doing his job. And I'm just doing mine, honoring my promise to him. Please let me do this. Let me help your family the way he helped mine. Dr. Carpenter arrived during visiting hours with updates. The infection was responding to treatment. Laura's vital signs were stabilizing, and if progress continued, she could be moved from ICU to a regular room by evening. We're also addressing the underlying issues, Dr. Carpenter said. The infection originated from an untreated injury. Mrs. Shaw, you mentioned hurting your back lifting furniture? Laura nodded. About a month ago, at the Montgomery estate. That injury created an abscess that went septic. You needed immediate care then. Waiting nearly killed you. The doctor's tone was professional, but carried an edge of frustration. You're going to need physical therapy, ongoing monitoring, and you cannot, absolutely cannot, return to physically demanding work. I'm a maid, Laura said helplessly. Physical work is all I know. Then we'll find you different work, Eddie said. The Shaw Family Foundation employs administrative staff, coordinators, counselors. There are roles that need filling, and you're qualified for all of them. I don't have qualifications beyond a high school diploma and 20 years of scrubbing floors. You have organizational skills, attention to detail, understanding of what struggling families need because you've lived it. Those are qualifications that matter. They left Laura resting, promising to return that evening with clothes and personal items from the apartment. The drive to Oak Ridge Towers felt like descending from one world into another, from Preston Hill's manicured comfort, back to peeling paint and cracked pavement. Mrs. Kimball was outside smoking when they arrived, and her eyes widened at the sedan and the distinguished elderly man accompanying Violet. Well, well, Betty said, approaching. Violet, honey, I've been worried sick. How's your mama? Getting better, Mrs. Kimball. The doctors say she'll be okay. Thank the Lord. Betty looked at Eddie with open curiosity. And who might you be? Eddie Bancroft, he said, offering his hand. A friend of Violet's father. That right? Betty shook his hand, her grip surprisingly firm. Good to know the child's got people looking out for her. Too many kids around here don't. Walter had remained in the car, and now he joined them carrying a small duffel bag. Equipment for documenting the apartment's condition, he explained. For legal purposes. They climbed the stairs to 3C, Violet leading the way. The apartment was exactly as they'd left it. Dishes from Wednesday's dinner still in the sink, the cold interior smelling of stale air and worry. Eddie walked through the small space slowly, taking in details. The improvised insulation around windows, the oven standing open for heat, the meticulous cleanliness fighting against poverty, the refrigerator's sparse contents. In the bedroom, he saw the mattress on the floor where Violet slept, the cramped quarters of mother and daughter sharing space designed for one. This is how you've been living, he said quietly. It wasn't a question. It's not so bad, Violet said, defensive. Mom keeps it really clean. It's unconscionable, Eddie corrected, that military families live like this while I sit in a house with empty bedrooms. That the daughter of a man who saved my life sleeps on a mattress on the floor. Walter photographed everything with professional thoroughness. The broken heating, the electrical outlets missing covers, the window that wouldn't fully close, the mold in the bathroom corner. Documentation for the complaints Eddie intended to file. They packed Violet's belongings, which fit entirely in 2 garbage bags. Laura's clothes and personal items filled 3 more. The apartment's furniture was minimal. The mismatched kitchen table and chairs, a battered sofa, the bed frame and mattress, a few lamps. Nothing worth moving, nothing that carried value beyond utility. We'll arrange storage for what you want to keep, Walter said to Violet, and replacement for what you don't. A heavy knock at the door announced Malcolm Jennings' arrival. He pushed in without invitation, his face already set in anger. Noon on Friday, just like I said, where's the rent? Malcolm stopped short when he saw Eddie and Walter, his bluster faltering. Who are you people? I'm General Edward Bancroft. Retired, Eddie said, his voice carrying parade ground authority. And you must be Mr. Jennings. General, Malcolm recovered quickly, suspicion replacing surprise. Laura called in some big shot to beg for more time? It won't work. Rules are rules. Indeed they are, Eddie agreed. Which is why I'm particularly interested in the rules you've broken. Housing code violations, for instance. Inoperable heating in winter, electrical hazards, structural issues. The list Walters compiled is quite extensive. Now wait a minute. I'm not finished. Eddie's tone could have frozen steel. There's also the matter of discriminatory practices, charging different rates to different tenants based on their perceived vulnerability. Illegal fees, failure to return security deposits. Would you like me to continue, or shall we discuss resolution? Malcolm's face reddened. You can't come in here threatening me. I'm not threatening, I'm informing. The complaints have already been filed with the County Housing Authority and the State Attorney General's office. Investigations are forthcoming. However, Eddie paused. There is a path forward where this becomes less painful for you. What do you want? Malcolm asked through gritted teeth. You will forgive all outstanding debts for the Shaw family. You will return their full security deposit. You will provide written confirmation that they are voluntarily ending their lease with no penalties. And you will agree to cooperate with building-wide inspections and repairs. And if I don't, then the investigations proceed without cooperation credit, and I personally ensure that every regulatory agency with jurisdiction becomes intimately familiar with your business practices. Eddie smiled without warmth. I have time, resources, and motivation. Do you? Malcolm looked between Eddie and Walter, calculating odds, recognizing power when it stood before him. Fine, Shaw's debt is forgiven, I'll write it up. Walter will observe while you do so, Eddie said, and we'll need copies of all relevant documents. The paperwork took 20 minutes, Malcolm producing forms from his car with ill grace, while Walter documented everything. When finished, the Shaw family was released from their lease with written proof, their security deposit check issued on the spot. One more thing, Eddie said as Malcolm turned to leave. Mrs. Kimball in 1B. I understand her rent increased 30% last year despite no property improvements. That's none of your... Reduce it back to her previous rate, effective immediately. Consider it a gesture of good faith as you work to bring this building into compliance with housing codes. Malcolm left without another word, his heavy steps echoing in the stairwell-like retreat. Mrs. Kimball appeared in their doorway moments later, having clearly been listening. Did that actually just happen? Your rent's going back down, Violet told her, and they're going to fix the building. Betty pulled Violet into a hug that smelled of cigarettes and floral perfume. You're a special child, you know that. Your daddy's watching over you from up there. They loaded the garbage bags into the sedan's trunk, took a final look at the apartment that had been home, and locked the door for the last time. Violet felt strange relief. Not quite sadness, not quite joy, but the peculiar lightness of burden lifted. One more stop, Eddie said as they drove, the Montgomery estate. Why? Violet asked, confused. Because your mother worked there, and her employer should know why she won't be returning. The Montgomery estate sprawled behind decorative iron gates, its colonial architecture perfect and cold. Walter pressed the intercom, announcing them, and the gates swung open. Mrs. Irene Montgomery met them in the front parlor, her expression one of practiced courtesy until she recognized Violet as Laura's daughter. Confusion crossed her face when she noticed Eddie. Mrs. Montgomery, Eddie said with formal politeness. I'm General Edward Bancroft. We need to discuss Laura Shaw. My housekeeper? Irene's tone suggested ownership. Is there a problem? Yes. She's currently in the ICU at Riverside Community recovering from sepsis that nearly killed her. Irene had the grace to look shocked. I had no idea. She called in sick, but I assumed. You assumed wrong. Laura worked herself nearly to death because she was terrified of losing income, of disappointing you, of being replaced. She ignored a serious medical condition because she couldn't afford to see a doctor while paying rent and feeding her daughter. I'm very sorry to hear that, but I don't see how this concerns. You fired her, Eddie said flatly. Wednesday, when she collapsed from fever and pain in your home, you terminated her employment for creating a scene. Irene's face flushed. She was disruptive during a busy preparation period. She was dying. Eddie's voice was soft but carried the weight of absolute conviction. And instead of calling an ambulance or showing human compassion, you worried about your dinner party. General Bancroft, I run a household, not a charity. Neither do I. But I understand the difference between maintaining standards and treating people as disposable. Laura Shaw worked for you for how long? 4 years, Irene admitted. 4 years of reliability, of quality work, of never complaining about conditions or demands, and when she needed grace, you showed her the door. Emily Montgomery appeared in the doorway, Irene's daughter, whom Violet vaguely remembered as being kinder than her mother. Emily's face showed distress as she processed the conversation. Mom, you fired Laura while she was sick? Emily asked. That's horrible. Stay out of this, Emily, Irene snapped. I won't. Emily turned to Eddie. General, I apologize for my mother. Laura was always good to us, especially to my daughter Bailey. If there's anything I can do. There is, Eddie said. The Shaw Family Foundation supports military families transitioning to civilian life. We could use volunteers, people willing to mentor, to offer administrative support. If you're sincere about helping, we'd welcome your involvement. I'd like that very much, Emily said, ignoring her mother's glare. Eddie handed Emily his card, then turned back to Irene. I wanted you to know the consequences of your actions. Laura survived, but she could have died. Remember that next time you weigh convenience against compassion. They left Irene Montgomery standing in her perfect parlor, her daughter already texting information about the foundation, a small crack in the privileged fortress. In the car, Violet was quiet, processing the day's confrontations. Eddie had fought battles for her family with words and authority, wielding power in ways Violet was only beginning to understand. Why did you tell Mrs. Montgomery? Violet asked. She can't hurt us anymore. Because people like her need to understand that actions have consequences. She may never change, but perhaps next time she'll pause before firing someone who's struggling. Or perhaps Emily will carry forward different values. Small changes create ripples. That evening at the hospital, Laura cried when they told her about the apartment resolution, about Malcolm's retreat, about the Montgomery confrontation. Relief warred with residual fear, the ingrained terror of poverty not easily dismissed. You're safe now, Eddie assured her. Both of you. The foundation has housing for families in transition, fully furnished apartments where you can live while determining your next steps. Or, if you prefer, the guest cottage on my property is vacant. It's yours for as long as you need it. The guest cottage, Laura repeated, trying to imagine such security. 2 bedrooms, full kitchen, private entrance, walking distance to the main house, but completely independent. Violet could attend the elementary school near Preston Hill, which has significantly better resources than Jefferson. I don't want to leave Chloe, Violet said, thinking of her one school friend. Then we'll arrange for Chloe to visit regularly. Whatever you need to feel secure. Dr. Carpenter arrived with evening rounds, confirming Laura would move to a regular room tomorrow and potentially discharge by Tuesday if recovery continued. The transformation from near-death to hopeful prognosis in 36 hours felt miraculous, though Violet understood it was simply the magic of modern medicine applied without financial barrier. They returned to the Bancroft residence for dinner. Agnes had prepared chicken and roasted vegetables with chocolate cake for dessert that made Violet's eyes widen. I figured we could use something sweet after a hard day, Agnes said, serving generous slices. After dinner, Eddie led Violet to a study, a wood-paneled room lined with bookshelves and military memorabilia. He gestured to a leather chair, and she climbed up, feeling small in the adult-sized furniture. I want to show you something, Eddie said, opening a drawer in his desk. He pulled out a folder thick with documents and photographs. Inside were the origins of the Shaw Family Foundation, incorporation papers, mission statements, budgets, but also photographs. Richard Shaw in uniform, Richard with his unit, Richard receiving commendations. I've been collecting these for years, Eddie explained. Requesting official records, reaching out to soldiers who served with your father, building a complete picture of who he was beyond the day he saved my life. Violet paged through the documents, seeing her father through strangers' eyes. commendation letters praising his technical expertise, his mentorship of younger soldiers, his calm under pressure, photographs showing him at work in the armory, teaching classes, laughing with fellow soldiers. He was respected, Eddie said, not just competent, but genuinely admired. People trusted him with their weapons because they trusted him with their lives. "I wish I remembered more," Violet said softly. "I was only 4 when he died." "Then let me help you remember through others, memories." And Violet, I want to ask you something. Next month, Fort Morgan is holding a ceremony honoring service members who died in the line of duty over the past 5 years. Your father qualifies. Would you and your mother agree to attend? They'll present you with honors, recognize his service officially. "Will people be there?" Violet asked, suddenly anxious. "Many people. Soldiers, commanders, other families. It's a significant event. I don't know what to say to people." "You don't have to say anything. You just have to be there, representing your father, letting the military community honor him properly." Violet thought about her father, about the man in the photographs who looked so young, so alive. "Okay, we'll come." Eddie smiled, relief evident. "Thank you. It means more than you know." The days flowed into a routine that felt surreal in its stability. Violet attended Jefferson Elementary through the following week while arrangements were made for transfer to Preston Hill Elementary after Thanksgiving. Chloe was thrilled to hear about Violet's rich grandfather helping her family, though Violet carefully explained Eddie wasn't actually her grandfather, just someone who owed her father a debt. Derek Matthews and Trevor Hughes attempted their usual harassment on the bus, but something had shifted in Violet. She no longer felt their mockery's sting. When Derek called her Weird Shaw, she simply smiled and returned to her book. "Why aren't you bothered anymore?" Chloe asked, curious. "Because I know something they don't," Violet said. "I know what I'm capable of. I fixed an impossible weapon. I helped my mom when she was dying. Their opinions don't change what I've done." Laura was discharged from the hospital Tuesday morning, weak but recovering. Walter drove her directly to the guest cottage on the Bancroft estate, where Agnes had prepared the space with fresh linens, stocked kitchen, and vases of flowers on every surface. The cottage was painted yellow with white trim, its interior bright and warm. The furniture was comfortable without being ostentatious, the kitchen properly equipped, the bedroom sized for actual human habitation rather than packed efficiency. Laura stood in the living room and cried, overwhelmed by space and safety. "It's too much," she whispered to Eddie, who'd accompanied them for the move-in. "It's enough," he corrected gently. "Just enough for you and Violet to heal, to rest, to plan your futures without crisis dictating every decision." Violet explored her new bedroom, larger than the one at Eddie's main house, with windows overlooking the garden and enough floor space to actually move around. She unpacked her few belongings, arranging her father's photograph on the dresser, setting up her notebooks on the desk. That evening, they ate dinner as a family in the cottage. Laura, Violet, Eddie, and Walter, who'd become a constant presence. Agnes had sent over a casserole with reheating instructions, her care extending to the cottage as naturally as breathing. "Tell me about the foundation," Laura said to Eddie. "I want to understand what Richard's name is attached to." Eddie explained the Shaw Family Foundation's mission: supporting military families during transition periods, providing emergency funds for housing and medical care, offering educational scholarships for children of fallen soldiers. Since 2011, they'd helped over 300 families navigate the difficult terrain between military service and civilian life. "And you've been funding this yourself?" Laura asked. "The initial endowment came from me," Eddie confirmed. "But we have other donors now, grants, fundraising events. It's become larger than one person's guilt, though I won't pretend guilt wasn't the founding motivation." "It's not guilt," Violet said firmly. "My dad saved your life. You're honoring that. There's a difference." "Wise words from a young lady," Eddie said with a smile. The conversation shifted to practical matters: Laura's work rehabilitation, her interest in helping the foundation administratively, Violet's school transfer. Plans formed, tentative but hopeful. After dinner, while Laura rested, Eddie took Violet to his private gun range at the back of the property. The range was professional grade, built with proper backstops and safety measures, a place where Eddie maintained his marksmanship skills. "I want to test the pistol," Eddie said. "Would you like to watch?" Violet nodded eagerly. Eddie had brought the M1911, now cleaned beyond even Violet's careful work, properly lubricated with the correct oils. He'd also purchased ammunition, .45 ACP rounds that looked enormous to Violet's eyes. The gun is functioning, but we need to verify it's safe, Eddie explained, conducting a thorough inspection before loading. Your repairs were excellent, but test firing is essential. He demonstrated proper stance, grip, sight alignment, lecturing like he must have done for countless soldiers over his career. Then he fired. The pistol's report was shockingly loud, despite hearing protection. Flame erupted from the barrel, the slide cycled smoothly, and downrange the target showed a neat hole in the center. Eddie fired again, then again, establishing rhythm. 7 rounds emptied, the slide locking back on the empty magazine exactly as designed. Perfect function, Eddie announced, clearing the weapon and setting it down. Violet, your improvised parts are performing flawlessly. The reinforced spring, the resharpened extractor, the cleaned mechanism, all of it is working beyond my expectations. Really? Violet felt pride swell in her chest. Really? You took a weapon 3 gunsmiths declared unsalvageable and restored it to full functionality using household items and your father's tools. That's not just impressive, it's virtuoso-level work. My dad would be proud, Violet said. Your dad is proud, Eddie corrected. Wherever he is, he's watching you carry forward his legacy. They returned to the cottage as twilight deepened, the November air sharp with coming winter. Laura was reading on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, looking more peaceful than Violet had seen her in years. The pistol works perfectly, Eddie told her. Your daughter is a master armorer at age 7. She gets that from Richard, Laura said. I can barely change a light bulb, but he could fix anything. Engines, electronics, weapons. He said understanding how things broke was the first step to preventing failure. A philosophy that extends beyond mechanics, Eddie observed. Understanding how systems break, whether mechanical or social, helps us build more resilient ones. It was a seed of thought that would eventually lead to Laura's role in the foundation, using her lived experience of poverty and struggle to design better support systems for families navigating crisis. But that was future thinking. For now, they were simply 3 people. A widow, her daughter, and the man who owed them everything. Sharing space in a yellow cottage, building trust and healing. Thanksgiving arrived cold and bright. Eddie insisted they celebrate together at the main house, where Agnes prepared a feast that seemed designed to feed an entire battalion. Turkey, stuffing, 3 kinds of potatoes, vegetables, pies, and enough leftovers to sustain them for a week. Sergeant Major Russell Bradford joined them, Eddie's old friend from decades of service. Russell was 70, white-haired and barrel-chested, with a booming laugh and gentle manner. So you're the famous Violet, Russell said, shaking her hand with exaggerated formality. Eddie's told me about your mechanical genius. Says you fixed his pistol better than new. I just cleaned it and replaced some worn parts, Violet said modestly. Don't sell yourself short, Russell said. Eddie also tells me your daddy was Richard Shaw. I knew Shaw briefly, came through Fort Morgan in '09 for advanced armorer training. Smart man, dedicated. You've got good genes, kid. The dinner conversation flowed easily. Military stories mixing with Laura's hospital recovery tales and Violet's school anecdotes. It felt like family, not the desperate 2-person unit of mother and daughter clinging to survival, but an expanded circle of support and care. After dinner, as Agnes served pie, Eddie cleared his throat with the particular emphasis that signaled important announcements. I wanted to share some news, he said. The ceremony at Fort Morgan has been scheduled for December 15th. It'll be a formal event honoring 15 service members, including Chief Warrant Officer Richard Shaw. Laura, Violet, you'll be escorted by military honor guard. There will be speeches, presentations, and a reception afterward. Will I have to talk? Violet asked nervously. Only if you want to. The ceremony focuses on remembrance, not performance. What do we wear? Laura worried. I don't have anything formal. Already arranged, Eddie said. Agnes has measurements and will take you shopping this weekend. Consider it part of the occasion. The week between Thanksgiving and the ceremony passed in preparation. Laura grew stronger daily, her color returning, her movements less painful. She began working part-time at the Foundation's office, initially just answering phones and organizing files, but quickly demonstrating organizational skills that had been wasted scrubbing floors. Violet transferred to Preston Hill Elementary, where the classrooms were smaller, the materials newer, and the teacher-to-student ratio actually allowed for individual attention. She missed Chloe, but discovered other children at her new school who shared her interests in history and mechanics. Shopping for ceremony clothes revealed another world. The dress shop Agnes chose carried formal wear that cost more than Violet's entire previous wardrobe. She selected a navy blue dress that felt sophisticated without being uncomfortable, while Laura chose a simple black dress that made her look elegant despite her thinness. December 15th arrived with crystalline cold, the sky painfully blue. A car arrived at 9 a.m., not Eddie's sedan but a military vehicle with escort flags. Inside waited Captain Lawrence Meyer, the Honor Guard coordinator, who introduced himself with professional courtesy. "It's an honor to escort Chief Warrant Officer Shaw's family," Captain Meyer said. "Your husband's service is remembered with respect and gratitude." The drive to Fort Morgan took 20 minutes, passing through security checkpoints, where guards saluted the vehicle. The ceremony would take place in the base chapel, a simple stone building that had witnessed countless military observances over 7 decades. Inside, families gathered in quiet clusters. Other widows, other children, all dressed in their best clothes, all carrying the weight of absent loved ones. Violet recognized the expression on their faces, the particular sadness of military families who understood sacrifice intellectually but felt its cost daily. Eddie was already present, wearing his dress uniform for the first time Violet had seen. The 3 stars on his shoulders, the ribbons across his chest, the precise tailoring. He looked like the general he'd been, authority and honor made manifest. He approached Laura and Violet, his bearing formal but his eyes warm. "You both look beautiful," he said quietly. "Richard would be so proud." The ceremony began promptly at 11 a.m. Colonel James Whitford, Fort Morgan's commander, delivered opening remarks about service and sacrifice. Then, one by one, the fallen were honored. When Richard Shaw's name was called, Violet and Laura stood and approached the front. A photograph of Richard in uniform was displayed on an easel. Young, smiling, full of the confidence that came from skill and purpose. Captain Meyer read Richard's commendations, his service record, the circumstances of his injuries and ultimate death. Then he presented Laura with a folded flag, the ceremonial gesture practiced to perfection. "On behalf of a grateful nation and the United States Army," Captain Meyer said, "please accept this flag as a symbol of our appreciation for your husband's honorable and faithful service." Laura took the flag with trembling hands, pressing it against her chest. Tears flowed freely down her face. But there was more. Colonel Whitford stepped forward carrying a shadow box display. Inside was Richard's Bronze Star, his Good Conduct medals, his campaign ribbons, and his dog tags. The same tags Violet used to wear before giving them to the display as part of the ceremony preparation. Chief Warrant Officer Shaw's technical expertise and dedication to his fellow soldiers exemplified the Army's values, Colonel Whitford said. His legacy lives on not only through his family but through every soldier whose weapon he maintained, whose life he protected through his careful work. We honor his memory and his service. Eddie stood and approached the podium. He hadn't told them he would speak, and Violet watched with surprise as he cleared his throat. "I knew Richard Shaw briefly but memorably," Eddie began, his command voice carrying through the chapel. "In September 2010, during an ambush in Kandahar province, Chief Warrant Officer Shaw pulled me from a burning vehicle seconds before it exploded. He sustained injuries that would ultimately contribute to his death 12 years later. He gave me 15 years of life I wouldn't have had. Years to see my son grow, to meet my grandchildren, to continue serving our nation." Eddie looked directly at Violet. "But Richard Shaw's greatest accomplishment isn't saving a general. It's raising a daughter who inherited his skill, his integrity, and his dedication to excellence." At age 7, Violet Shaw restored an antique M1911 pistol that professional gunsmiths declared unsalvageable. She did it with improvised tools and makeshift parts, guided by lessons her father taught her when she was barely old enough to hold a wrench. He paused, letting that sink in. That's legacy. That's immortality. When we teach our children, when we pass forward our knowledge and our values, we never truly die. Richard Shaw lives in every bolt his daughter tightens, every mechanism she repairs, every problem she solves with patience and skill. Eddie's voice roughened with emotion. The Shaw Family Foundation exists because I couldn't save Richard, but I can honor him by helping his family and others like them. Military families sacrifice in ways civilians rarely understand. Separation, danger, financial hardship, and sometimes the ultimate loss. Supporting them isn't charity. It's duty. It's recognition that freedom's cost is borne unequally, and those who bear it deserve our unwavering support. He returned to his seat as the chapel erupted in applause, not the polite ceremony applause, but genuine appreciation. Other military families nodded, recognizing their own struggles acknowledged. The ceremony concluded with a reception in the chapel hall. Violet found herself surrounded by soldiers who'd known her father, each offering condolences and stories. Richard helping with a particularly stubborn rifle. Richard staying late to ensure every weapon was perfect before a deployment. Richard's patience teaching younger soldiers the craft of armorer work. "Your dad saved my life too," a sergeant first class told Violet. "Not as dramatic as pulling someone from a fire, but he caught a defect in my rifle that would have caused a catastrophic failure. He didn't have to check it. It was already cleared by another armorer, but he checked everything twice. That's the kind of man he was." Laura collected these stories like treasures, each one filling in gaps in her understanding of who Richard had been away from home. She'd known him as a husband and father, but these soldiers knew him as a professional, a mentor, a craftsman. As the reception wound down, Eddie approached them with Russell Bradford in tow. "There's one more thing," Eddie said. "If you're willing, I'd like to establish a scholarship in Richard's name at Preston Hill Elementary, specifically for children interested in mechanical engineering and technical trades. Violet's talent shouldn't be unique. There are probably dozens of kids with similar aptitudes who never get the chance to develop them." "That's a wonderful idea," Laura said. "Richard would love knowing his name helped other children learn." They left Fort Morgan in the late afternoon, exhausted but somehow lighter. The ceremony had made Richard's sacrifice official, public, honored. The weight of his death remained, but it was balanced now by recognition of his life's value. Back at the cottage, they changed into comfortable clothes and gathered in the living room. Eddie had joined them, along with Walter and Agnes, creating the found family that had formed around shared loss and unexpected connection. "I've been thinking about next steps," Laura said. "I want to work full-time for the foundation. Not because I owe you, General, but because I understand what these families need. I've lived it. I can help design programs that actually work, that address real problems instead of theoretical ones." "I was hoping you'd say that," Eddie said with a smile. "We need someone who understands both the military culture and the civilian struggles. You're uniquely qualified." "And I've been thinking too," Violet added. "When I'm older, I want to be an armorer like my dad. I want to maintain weapons for soldiers, keep them safe the way he did." "You'll be an excellent armorer," Eddie said. "But Violet, you could be more. You could be an engineer, a designer, someone who improves the tools soldiers use. Your talent is rare. Don't limit yourself." "I'll think about it," Violet said. "But whatever I do, I want it to help people, like my dad did, like you're doing now." They talked late into the evening, planning futures that had seemed impossible just weeks ago. Laura's health continued to improve. Violet thrived in her new school. The foundation grew under Eddie's leadership and Laura's practical insights. Malcolm Jennings's building was condemned 3 months later. The residents relocated to better housing, some through the foundation's programs. Mrs. Kimball moved into a subsidized apartment complex with actual heating and management that responded to maintenance requests. Chloe Anderson became a regular weekend visitor at the cottage, the girls maintaining their friendship despite different schools. Derek Matthews and Trevor Hughes faded into irrelevance, bullies only powerful when their targets felt powerless. Mrs. Irene Montgomery was never prosecuted for firing a sick employee, but Emily Montgomery joined the foundation's board and became one of its most effective fundraisers, her family's wealth redirected toward actual good. 1 year later, on Eddie's 74th birthday, Violet presented him with a carefully wrapped box. Inside was his M1911 pistol, now in a custom display case with a brass plaque. "Restored with skill and love by Violet Shaw, armorer's daughter, in honor of her father and the man he saved. November 2025. I wanted you to have it properly displayed," Violet said. "So you remember that old weapons can be made new again, and that my dad's legacy is still doing good in the world." Eddie held the display case with hands that trembled slightly, not from age, but from the weight of emotion. "I'll treasure this always," he said. "Not just the pistol, but what it represents. Your father's gift to me and your gift to him, and the circle of honor that connects us all." They stood together in Eddie's study, the man who'd been saved and the girl who'd inherited the skills of the saver, looking at a weapon that had witnessed 5 decades of history and had been reborn through makeshift parts and a child's dedication. Outside the window, Riverside prepared for another winter. The trees were bare, the sky heavy with coming snow. But inside the Bancroft residence and the yellow cottage beyond, warmth and security held firm. Violet Shaw, daughter of Chief Warrant Officer Richard Shaw, had done the impossible with wire, pennies, and a nail file. But more importantly, she'd learned that help, when offered with respect and received with grace, wasn't charity, it was community. It was how humans survived impossible things. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, it was how you discovered that your father's legacy lived not just in memory, but in the connections he'd forged and the lives he'd touched, rippling forward through time, transforming tragedy into hope. The pistol in its case caught the late afternoon light, steel gleaming, waiting for nothing, ready for everything, restored and honored and home. Up next, 2 more incredible stories are waiting for you right on your screen. If you enjoy this one, you won't want to miss this. Just click to watch. And don't forget to subscribe. It would mean a lot.